Part 18. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 171. When giving a girl a gift, it is not important whether it is expensive or not, but whether it contains your own thoughts and can make the other person feel this thought. In the fairy world, especially in the Lianji sect, many disciples have more or less stock, rare elixirs, and even various precious natural treasures. As a disciple of the Lianji sect, they all have more or less. Musian's biggest advantage is not the elixirs he has, because the elixirs he has are more or less available to other disciples, but the number of elixirs may not be as much as Musian. His biggest advantage lies in his relationship with Lan Murian. That senior sister Lan is like a snow lotus that is hard to pick on the top of a snowy peak. There are many disciples pursuing her, but only Musian can really enter the heart of the beauty. Lan Murian may remember the elixir, but she will not be impressed. After all, disciples who have a good relationship with Lan Murian will probably choose to give elixirs. What he should do is to play to his own advantages. As expected of a maid who had been following her young master for a long time, Wei Mengru immediately thought of something after a brief hesitation. She stared at Musian coldly and said, "Are you planning to go back to Tianqian City?" Musian smiled and nodded, "It's been a while since I've been back, so I'll find time to go back these 2 days. I miss Tianqian City." Wei Mengru stood proudly, her yellow skirt swaying in the morning breeze, clinging to her snow-white skin, highlighting her sexy figure. She glanced at him sideways and said lightly, "If you can practice as hard as you pursue a girl, you won't have reached the God-refining realm until now. Of course you have to be more attentive to practice, but you can't fall behind in pursuing a senior sister." Musian smiled lightly. To this day, Musian has accepted his fate. The jealousy of the heavens in him is obviously not his talent, but his assistant's ability. Of course, accepting fate is not lying down. Strength can be improved slowly, but it is necessary to ensure that the strength of Bairuoxi and others cannot fall behind. In the future, when Bairuoxi and his 2 sisters enter the Return to Void realm one by one, he will be more and more relaxed. Of course, there is a prerequisite, that is, the relationship with the several protagonists must be good, at least to the extent of holding hands and kissing each other. Of course, if it is possible to be closer on this basis, it will be better. After the strength of the protagonists becomes stronger, it can also bring benefits to him, such as the promotion pill given by Lan Murian before, the cultivation bonus and physical bonus brought by Bairuoxi's heavenly chi, etc. "I will also give Sister Mengro a gift when I come back," Musian said with a smile. Wei Mengru uttered a and said lightly, "I have no interest in your gift." Musian had long been accustomed to Wei Mengru's indifference and smiled, "No need to be interested, I just want to give it to you, is that not okay?" Wei Mengru said lightly, "Whatever you like." Anyway, she knew that her young master's attentiveness to her must have no good intentions, and it was enough to know this. But the young master was still a little too naive. Miss Bai looked weak and had no bad intentions, but from the communication with her during this period, this weak and cold young lady was not as gentle as she seemed. In the future, when she really entered the Return to Void realm, would she really give Musian to someone else? Doesn't her young master know who the heart-to-heart lock is used to lock? Yelingxian is the daughter of the Forbidden Zone, and will inherit the Queen of the Forbidden Zone in the future. Even if she really enters the Return to Void realm in the future, will she really be willing to serve her young master with other girls? Yeqian, she didn't know much, so she didn't comment much. As for that senior sister, it's not very realistic. If they really step into the Return to Void realm in the future, the young master may not be afraid of external enemies, but what about the internal enemies? Wei Mengru's green jade fingers played with a strand of hair that fell down, and her lips outlined a faint arc. However, this has nothing to do with her. After all, she is just a maid responsible for protecting the young master's safety. Yes, just to protect safety. Chastity is not within her protection. Dao Feng. It seems that both of you have not fallen behind in your cultivation, not bad. Yuzian wore a dark purple feather robe, outlining her sexy figure, with a bright red cinnabar on her forehead. Her plump buttocks were pressed on the soft couch, and she looked up and stared at the two sisters in front of her, smiling, with sincere appreciation and satisfaction in her eyes. Compared with the mature and sexy Dao Feng head, the two girls in front of her were a little immature. Ye Lingxian wore a purple long skirt, with a slender figure and a graceful back. Her hair was tied up with a hairpin, which showed off her classical and exquisite oval face. She didn't have the sexiness of the Dao Feng's chief seat, but she had a pure face that other women didn't have, and her skin was white and flawless. Ye Lingxian smiled and said, "It's all because of the master's training. If Qian'er and I had practiced alone, we wouldn't have made such rapid progress." Ye Lingxian still respected this master in her heart. In the major main peaks, disciples basically don't see the chief seat on weekdays. Most of them are guided by the three elders of the main peak and the senior sisters and brothers. Unless there is something particularly important, the chief seat is a mysterious dragon that can't be seen from head to tail. However, Yuzian was quite concerned about the Yes sisters. She would try every means to help them solve any problems. She fulfilled her promise early on. She first helped Yeqian obtain some inheritance, and then gave Yeqian the same elixir resources as the inner disciples. Last night, when Yeqian was meditating and practicing, she was troubled and came to see the master early in the morning. And Yuzian also happily let them in and guided them in their practice. For Ye Lingxuan's sweet praise, even the cold and beautiful Taoist nun couldn't help but smile at this moment. Qian'er has become so powerful without knowing it. Yuzian stared at Yeqian with her beautiful eyes. Her temperament was clear and beautiful, and her voice was rich in texture and soft and charming. A few months ago, Yeqian's talent was only a little better than that of ordinary people. However, not long after she accepted a small inheritance from Dao Feng last time, she seemed to have gained some immortal fate in the pilgrimage temple yesterday. The qi emanating from her body at this moment was not much worse than that of her sister. Yeqian lowered her head and said reservedly, "It's all thanks to Brother Mu. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have my current talent. Practice depends on yourself." "What does it have to do with your brother Mu?" Yuzian shook her head and smiled. "It's related." Yeqian raised her head and looked at the cold and beautiful woman who seemed to be dripping with honey, and said, "If it weren't for Brother Mu, I wouldn't have my current talent." The beautiful Taoist nun was obviously stunned for a moment. Then, she recalled the skill that Yeqian used to ask her questions this morning. The skill showed a green lotus that looked only the size of a palm. And at that time, what emanated from the green lotus was an astonishing sealing force. I didn't notice it just now, but now I think about it, if there is only one person in the world who can use Qinglian as a practice, it seems that there is only one person? Yuzian's eyes flickered slightly, and she reached out and grabbed one of Yeqian's little hands, and then closed her eyes. While sending the qi into Yeqian's body, she calmly felt the changes in the cauldron in the girl's body at this moment. The Tao that Dao Feng cultivated is natural, so Yuzian almost noticed the changes in Yeqian's body at the first time. This spiritual energy is not only Yeqian's, but also, the spiritual energy emitted from Senior Kingdi yesterday. What you got in the pilgrimage hall yesterday was the inheritance of Kingdi. Yuzian opened her beautiful eyes, and stared at her disciple with a pair of smart eyes. Yeqian looked at her master with a little surprise in her eyes, and then nodded gently. It is indeed the inheritance of Senior Kingdi. Yuzian's eyes are slightly enlightened. That's right. Judging from yesterday's performance, Muzian is obviously loved by Senior Kingdi, or coveted. As one of Muzian's sisters, Muzian would naturally want to get some benefits for her sister. But she didn't expect that Senior Kingdi would give all his inheritance to Qian'er. Yuzian came back to her senses slightly, and her eyes stared at Yeqian again, and there was a little more burning. She chose Yeqian because she saw the talent of her sister Ye Lingxian, but now, even Yeqian has such an amazing talent. Master, what's wrong? Yeqian blinked her peach blossom eyes, and was embarrassed by Yuzian's stare and turned away, asking in a low voice. Yuzian woke up from her thoughts just now, and had regained her calmness just now, with a faint smile on her face. In 2 months, it will be the Ascension Conference. I trust the talents of both of you. You can try to experience it at that time. Maybe there will be a good opportunity. Yes, both of them responded respectfully. Yuzian nodded. If you two have nothing else to do, go to the top of Daofeng and exchange ideas with other disciples to gain more practical experience so that you can show your skills in the future Ascension Conference. Ye Lingxian and Yeqian both nodded gently and left the hall. After a while, a disciple strode into the hall and bowed, saying, Master, Musian, the inner disciple of the library, is outside to see you. Musian? Why did he come so early in the morning? Shouldn't he go to the junior sister first? Yuzian's eyes flashed slightly, and she immediately said, Please let him in. Then, she thought for a moment and continued, Let him wait in the side hall for a while and serve tea. Before meeting the disciple, she had to take a bath and change clothes first. Musian waited in the side hall for nearly half an hour before he saw the Daofeng head in a black robe coming from a door in the back. Although the robe completely concealed her figure, her slender legs and beautiful face that were revealed as she walked attracted Musian's attention. It should be said that she is worthy of being the head of Daofeng. Although she did not show much skin color, she gave people a full sense of abstinence, and they wanted to explore more. Musian glanced at her several times, then quietly retracted his gaze and said with a fist, Disciple Musian, meet Senior Yu. Yuzian smiled and said, How did you rest yesterday? Thank you for your concern, head. I rested for a night last night, and now my body has fully recovered to the best condition, Musian said. Yuzian nodded slightly, and then invited Musian to sit down and drink tea. Didn't little friend Mu agree that my junior sister would go see her today, so why did she come to me first so early in the morning? Yuzian took a sip of tea, her tone casual and gentle. The junior is really concerned about what the leader said yesterday, so he came here early in the morning. Does the senior have something to be busy with later? Musian asked tentatively. That's not true. I'm just asking out of curiosity. The voice of the leader of Daofeng was very nice, with a different texture, which was quite alluring. From the outside, she looked noble and unapproachable, but every move she made was filled with an inexplicable sense of temptation, so much so that Musian's eyes glanced back and forth at her bulging figure several times from the very beginning. You want to ask me about your maid, right? Yuzian guessed the purpose of Musian's visit this time, but she still asked specifically. Musian nodded slightly and said, Sure enough, nothing can be hidden from the leader. This junior is indeed here for this. I don't know why your maid's bad luck is so shocking. Yuzian first expressed her conclusion. Then, before Musian could express his disappointment, the mature and beautiful Taoist nun spoke again. However, I have discovered an interesting thing during this period of time. When Yuzian said this, she really saw that Musian's eyes were completely attracted to her. She pursed her elastic lips and said with a slight smile, the predecessor of the Dacian dynasty, it was another dynasty thousands of years ago, and there were some records about that dynasty in the ancient books at that time. According to what was said above, there was a monk in that dynasty who was very unlucky, and that monk was one of the factors that ultimately led to the collapse of the dynasty. The bad luck that affects the entire dynasty, is Sister Mengru really so unlucky? Why can't I feel it at all? Musian pondered for a moment and asked, Do you know the final outcome of that monk? If the identity of the monk and even what happened later could be found, it might be able to help Wei Mengru's bad luck. Yuzian shook her head slightly. I have already sent someone to tell you about this matter. If there is any news later, I will inform you. She paused and continued, the state of your mate is a bit strange. It stands to reason that her bad luck should affect the people around her, but the bad luck seems to be suppressed by something else. Sister Mengru's bad luck was suppressed by something, Mujian thought slightly, thinking about what Yuzian said. It wasn't until a while later that he raised his head as if in a trance and said sincerely, "Thank you, Senior. Today's trip was not in vain." At least they knew that Wei Mengru's bad luck was not unique to her. There were people who were as unlucky as her in the past. Yuzian shook her head and said with a smile, "It's just a little effort." The two chatted for a while, and Yuzian had finished drinking the tea in her hand. She looked at Muzian, who seemed to be planning to leave, with water in her eyes. After hesitating for a moment, her red lips slightly opened, and a cold and sweet voice came softly from the side hall. "Actually, I have encountered some troubles in my practice in recent years, and I may need your help. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 172. I wonder what the chief is talking about. When he heard what Yuzian said, Muzian had already guessed her purpose vaguely, but he remained calm on the surface. What can a junior who has just entered the realm of soul refining do to help the chief? Of course, if there is really something that needs help, the junior will definitely not refuse, Muzian continued. Yuzian was silent for a while, staring at Muzian, and was about to speak. "Why did senior sister bring my disciple to your Daofeng? Don't you know that I have something to do with him today?" At this time, a clear and pleasant voice suddenly came from outside the hall, which made Yuzian look at the front of the hall. The woman who wore a loose black robe and looked intellectual and gentle came to the front of the hall regardless of the disciple's obstruction. She smiled with her eyebrows and eyes, and her figure was plump and graceful, full of mature charm. It was Yan Ruyu, the owner of the library, who also had a high status in Lianji sect. Yuzian narrowed her eyes slightly, looked at the woman in front of her, and said, "Junior sister, it seems a bit inappropriate to come to my Daofeng so quietly." Fortunately, she didn't suddenly come in to disturb her when she was on the bed, otherwise if this junior sister saw her and Muzian, even she would probably be uneasy. Yuzian thought to herself. After all, using the natural furnace to upgrade the grade should be done secretly. If someone saw it, even if Yan Ruyu didn't spread it, the other party would probably make a fuss about it later. At that time, when they quarreled, the other party only needed to say you attacked the sect disciples, and she would naturally fall into the disadvantage in the quarrel. Everyone wanted the natural furnace, but this kind of thing must not be done on the table. Yan Ruyu raised her eyebrows slightly, looked at Yuzian who was sitting in the side hall, and said with a smile, "Senior sister, did you just take a bath? You still smell good." Yuzian frowned slightly, and saw Yan Ruyu speak again. "Why does senior sister want to take a bath to see a disciple? Are you trying to seduce the disciple to do something?" Yuzian sneered and said, "I need junior sister to tell me how to take a bath. Your disciple came to Daofeng to find me by himself, how come junior sister said that I seduced him? You sisters can fight, don't drag me into it." Muzian's scalp tingled when he noticed Yan Ruyu's smiling gaze, and he said respectfully, "Junior is because of my maid's matter. Yesterday, senior, you said that she found out some bad luck, so I was very curious when I went back, so I came to visit early this morning." The thing that Muzian was most worried about still happened. His fish pond is so small that it cannot accommodate so many great white sharks for the time being. Muzian had been worried about what to do if the great white sharks quarreled in the fish pond, but at that time he was still a young cultivator in the Qi training realm, so this hidden danger was not very obvious. But now he is already in the spirit training realm, and he is a cabbage that can be accepted. This pair of sisters who had a bad relationship in the past because of some things are bound to compete with each other. Yanruyu thinks that Muzian is her inner disciple and her own cabbage. Now that Muzian has reached the spirit training realm, she naturally does not want to hand Muzian over to Yuzian. But this Daofeng head is so arrogant that it is naturally impossible for him to give up just because of Yanruyu's words. It is really not easy for him, a small cultivator, to be caught between this pair of sisters. He wanted to be a little transparent, but he didn't expect that Yuzian suddenly asked a question and pushed him directly to the forefront. If he didn't think about it before answering, it would become very offensive. Yanruyu chuckled and said, "So it's because of your maid? No wonder you came to Daofeng so early in the morning. If you think about it carefully, it's true. There doesn't seem to be anything that can't attract you in Daofeng." The beautiful Taoist nun glanced at the intellectual and gentle junior sister and said lightly, "Junior sister has practiced in Daofeng for such a long time in the past. Now she is so jealous because the master passed the position of the first seed to me, and even slandered me. Isn't it not good?" "Sorry, it's indeed my problem." Yanruyu smiled with narrowed eyes. "It should be that Daofeng has no one who can attract my disciple. This is more accurate." Yuzian sneered, "If Daofeng has no one who can attract him, could it be that there is someone in the library? He is the inner disciple I accepted when I was selecting him. He would come here to ask me any questions on weekdays. How could there be no one who can attract him?" Yanruyu looked at Muzian with a smile and said, "Isn't that right?" Yuzian also looked at Muzian and smiled, "Which do you think is more attractive to you, Daofeng or library? Why don't you take this opportunity to resign as a disciple of the library and join my Daofeng? It happens that your two sisters are here too, so you can take care of each other in the future." The two powerful men in the Return to Void realm looked at Muzian in unison. Although their eyes were kind, Muzian felt his scalp tingling because of the oppression of the Return to Void realm or something else. At this moment, he caught a glimpse of the female disciple standing outside. Seeing her trembling at the entrance of the hall, he could not help but whisper, "Senior sister." The female disciple subconsciously raised her head to look at the junior brother who looked like a nobleman in the hall, and heard him continue to transmit, "Please invite Sister Lingxian into the hall, you just need to explain what happened in the hall to her. The junior brother will definitely reward you handsomely later. What's the point of calling junior sister Lingxian over?" This thought flashed through the female disciple's mind. Then, after a brief hesitation, she nodded gently, turned around and left quietly. Muzian took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. He raised his head to look at the two heads and said, "Two heads, I wonder if there is any misunderstanding between you." There was no way, now he could only bite the bullet and speak, to avoid them asking him to choose between the two again. "These are all the heads of Lianji sect, and they will meet each other later. He can't offend Yuzian because of this matter. I just didn't expect that Yanruyu would come to Daofeng early this morning. Can't everyone be more harmonious and friendly, like sisters and brothers together? Misunderstanding." Yanruyu glanced at her former sister coldly and said lightly, "You probably don't know how much flattery this woman did in the past to please my master. A cultivator should concentrate on meditation and practice, but my sister would disturb the master every now and then to please the master, under the pretext of asking for advice, but in fact it was just to leave a good impression in front of the master. If I remember correctly, when my sister was in Daofeng in the past, she seemed to be frightened by a rabbit raised by an elder one night, shouting that she had encountered a demon, and woke up other disciples who were resting at the time." Yuzian smiled lightly. Yanruyu's face was like frost, and her face was not very good. "Ah, you better stop talking about your dark history, lest you come to trouble me after you calm down." Muzian felt a headache for a while when he heard the two masters revealing each other's dark history. At this time, in front of the hall, a pleasant voice like the summer wind blowing through the silver bells suddenly came. "Brother Mu, why are you still here? Didn't you agree to accompany me and Chienner to the North Bank to relax today? As this pleasant voice sounded, the flames that were originally burning in the hall seemed to be suddenly poured with cold water, and the two masters looked at Ye Lingxian at the door of the hall. Under normal circumstances, no disciple dared to offend the two masters at this time. But Ye Lingxian was an exception. This smart girl usually wouldn't come in to disturb the two in this situation, but who made her a good sister who would feel sorry for Brother Mu. After hearing what the female disciple said just now, although Ye Lingxian didn't quite understand the reason, she still decided to come in to save Muzian from the water and fire. Under the gaze of the two, Ye Lingxian raised her head and said with a smile, "Do you two masters have anything else to do with Brother Mu? If nothing, I will go out with Brother Mu to relax later." Under Ye Lingxuan's sweet smile, Yan Ruyu's anger gradually subsided, and her mind gradually calmed down. She suddenly realized her gaffe just now. Acting so gaffe-like in front of the disciples, it would damage the image of Pavilion Master Yan. Yuzian also calmed down and smiled, "Now there is nothing to do, are you still planning to go out for a walk today?" Ye Lingxian looked well behaved and sensible, and nodded, "Yes, Brother Mu and I made an appointment yesterday, right?" She looked at Muzian. Muzian smiled and nodded. Then, he bowed to the two and asked tentatively, "Two masters, if there is nothing else, I will take my leave first." Yuzian nodded silently. In her eyes, there was some regret and some comfort. "Although I didn't become the first person to eat the cabbage, but at least I have ensured that my junior sister hasn't eaten the cabbage yet. It seems that next time I have to set up the barrier in advance to block Muzian's breath," Yuzian thought silently in her heart. Yan Ruyu smiled and nodded, looking at Muzian and said, "If nothing unexpected happens, junior sister Lan should start to transcend the tribulation in the next 2 days. After that, you can find a time to come to me, and then you can prepare a gift for junior sister on behalf of the library." Muzian clasped his fists and said yes. Yuzian's eyes also had a thoughtful look, looking at Ye Lingxian, and said, "If I remember correctly, you seem to have a good relationship with junior sister Lan? I will prepare a gift in the next 2 days, and then you can send it to junior sister Lan at Lianji Peak. Return to the Void Realm is extremely rare in Jizhu, not to mention that the person who transcends the tribulation this time is Lan Murian. The 9 main peaks, including the 2 neutral forces on the south bank and the north bank, will all send gifts. This gift represents the face of a main peak, so the gifts sent by the main peaks will naturally have some face." Looking at Ye Lingxuan's departing figure, Yuzian's eyes quickly fell on Muzian, but there was a little more thoughtfulness in her eyes. It seems that before the dual cultivation, the gift must be prepared first. After leaving the main hall of Daofeng, breathing the fresh air, Muzian slowly breathed a sigh of relief. "Sister Lingxian, thanks to you this time, you really helped a lot." He turned his head to look at Ye Lingxian, who was walking side by side with him, and said softly. Ye Lingxian shook her head gently, her voice clear and pleasant, "It's okay, as long as I can help Brother Mu." "But why are the 2 leaders fighting for you?" Ye Lingxian looked at Muzian in confusion, with a faint smile on her delicate and lovely face. Muzian shook his head helplessly, "Master Yan doesn't seem to have a good relationship with Leader Yu. They said they were fighting for me, but they probably just regarded me as a sign of victory." Ye Lingxuan's eyes were slightly enlightened, and she said to herself, "Is that so? I thought there was something special about Brother Mu that attracted them." Ye Lingxian continued. Muzian admired the surrounding environment calmly, pretending not to hear. "Where is Brother Mu going next?" Ye Lingxian suddenly asked. "If there is nothing else, it would be nice to take this opportunity to go to the North Bank with Brother Mu to relax. I have something to do later." Muzian said this, and he could see that Ye Lingxuan's eyes were a little more disappointed. He couldn't help but reach out and touch Ye Lingxuan's head gently, combing her soft hair, and said gently, "I will go out with you to relax in a few days, and then I will be Miss Lingxuan's servant for a day. How about it?" I don't want a servant. Lingxian glanced at Musian and snorted proudly. Then, as if she had thought of something interesting, she looked at Musian with a smile and said, if you become my servant, will you listen to me when I order you to do anything? Musian hesitated for a moment, and noticed the little expectation in the girl's eyes. He couldn't bear to refuse, so he smiled and nodded, saying, of course I will listen. Lingxian couldn't help but reveal a charming smile, and said in a tender voice, then it's an appointment. After walking with Lingxian in Daofeng for a while, Musian found an excuse to leave Lianji sect and flew to the direction of Tianxian city on his sword. In the evening of the next day, just as expected, after suppressing the realm 3 times, Lan Mulian's thunder tribulation finally fell. And in the vast thunder tribulation, the woman in the moon-white dress still stood still, just standing under the rolling tribulation clouds with a sword on her back, and greeted the thunder tribulation calmly. At this moment, Musian had already rushed back to Lianji sect from Tianxian city. When he looked up at the cold and arrogant senior sister under the rolling calamity clouds, he couldn't help but sigh secretly. Although he had never seen the senior sister take action so far, he had never underestimated her. After all, it is easy to imagine how amazing the talent of a disciple who can be favored by the sect master is. Well, the amount of breasts is also quite amazing, maybe just a little smaller than Ruoxi, but the scale is still quite good. Musian gazed at the moon-white figure in the distance with admiration, as well as the slender and round jade legs and jade feet wearing small embroidered shoes under the white gauze-like dress, and he couldn't help but feel a little fascinated. If I could be stepped on by the senior sister with such a cold attitude, Musian shook his head gently, dispelling the random thoughts in his mind. Musian, why do you always think about this kind of thing? You can't fall like this anymore. It won't be too late to consider this kind of thing after I really make my senior sister fall in love with it in the future. There were all kinds of noises around me. In addition to Musian, many disciples also came to the vicinity of Lianji Peak to watch this thunder tribulation today. After all, returning to the realm of emptiness can be said to be the lifelong dream of many cultivators. At this moment, a faint sweet fragrance suddenly came from my side, which was like a temptation that made people drunk. Musian subconsciously turned his head to look, and I don't know when it started. Lan Feiying, who was wearing a dark red dress and had a charming temperament, was standing beside me, looking up and gazing at her sister in the distance. Sister Feiying, it seems that I haven't seen you for more than a month. Last time I asked you to meet, you refused. Musian smiled and took the initiative to say hello. In the past few months, Musian went to Tianji Peak to find Lan Feiying twice, but he was refused to meet her once because she was trying to break through the 3rd level of soul refining at that time. Lan Feiying glanced at Musian with a charming look and said, the main purpose of a cultivator is to practice. How can they date outside every day? You should relax occasionally. After all, sometimes when you are at a bottleneck, it is easier to break through if you go out to relax, Musian said as he reached out to hold Lan Feiying's slender waist. Lan Feiying gently slapped Musian's hand away, glared at him, and said in a voice transmission, there are so many disciples watching here, don't mess around. Does it mean that you can mess around without disciples watching? Musian sighed sadly, Sister Feiying, you have changed. It seems that after you were promoted to the spirit refiner, there is a sad and thick barrier between you and me. Lan Feiying glanced at Musian. Knowing his personality, she naturally knew that he was just teasing her, so she didn't bother to pay attention to him at all. At this time, a cold snort suddenly came from the crowd. If relaxing is useful, there wouldn't be so many elders in the sect stuck in the return to void realm for so long without being promoted to a higher level. The voice was quite stern, and it also made many sect disciples present look in the direction. The sudden attack made Musian look in the direction of the voice. It was an elder he had never seen before. He was wearing a dark robe, with his hands behind his back, and looked like an immortal. Who is this? Why does he look unfamiliar? Musian looked a little puzzled. Lan Fading also glanced at the person who just spoke not far away, and transmitted a voice. He is the second elder of Ziwimengpeak. Musian understood slightly in his heart. It seems that his words just now that he could break through by going out to relax had touched the elder's sore spot. However, his original intention was to tease Lan Fading, and this was an unintentional act. In the crowd, Yayu looked at the scene and couldn't help but sneer secretly. Many elders in this sect are in the return to Void Realm and have no hope of breaking through all year round. Musian suddenly said this, didn't it just hit their sore spot? Moreover, the second elder is also Yayu's master in alchemy. He had heard about Yayu and Musian before, so naturally he didn't like this inner disciple of the library pavilion who liked to play tricks. Boom! At this time, on the top of Lianji Peak, as the last thunder sounded, the disciples raised their heads and stared at the figure in the slender and beautiful dress in the distance, with a bit of admiration in their eyes. Return to the Void Realm. The first person in the younger generation to be promoted to the Return to the Void Realm. Even if you look at the entire Jizhu, you may not find a second cultivator who has entered the Return to the Void Realm at this age. This Lan Mulian's talent is really amazing. Almost at the same time, many disciples and even several elders present had this thought in their minds. This senior sister Lan seems to have a better figure. After returning to the void, her skin has become whiter and tenderer, as if it will be wet if you pinch it. Musian looked at Lan Mulian, whose graceful figure was covered by the moonlight, and this thought came to his mind. Under the sky, Lan Mulian obviously noticed the disciples here, and her clear eyes stared silently. At this time, a soft and gentle voice suddenly came from the crowd. Lan Fading, a disciple of Tianji Peak, presents a 6th grade Ningguo pill to congratulate senior sister on her promotion to the Return to Void. 6th grade pill. When many disciples looked at the red-dressed beauty next to Musian, their eyes were also a little more surprised. It seems that Tianji Peak has also made preparations in advance, and even brought a 6th grade pill. The two sisters looked at each other, and then tacitly withdrew their gazes from each other. Lan Murian had a faint smile in her eyes, and her voice was cold and pleasant. Thank you, junior sister. Next, 2 or 3 more disciples sent by the main peaks spoke one after another, and the gifts they presented were either natural treasures or rare pills. At this time, Yayu also stepped forward 2 steps and respectfully handed over a delicate little wooden box. The second elder of Ziwimeng Peak has just delivered the gift. This gift is what I decided to give to my senior sister. Lan Mulian raised her eyebrows slightly, stretched out her white hands from her white cuffs, took the wooden box, and said, "Thank you, junior brother." Yayu smiled indifferently. "Senior sister, why don't you open it first?" This gift is also one of the manifestations of his progress. Lan Mulian heard the words and opened the delicate little wooden box calmly. At the same time, a pill in the wooden box also appeared in the field of vision. The pill was pink, and the appearance was shining. Almost at the same time as it was opened, a medicinal fragrance filled the air. 6th grade pill, the anti-aging pill. Immediately, a disciple in the crowd recognized the pill, and many female disciples had a little more fiery color in their eyes. This Yayu, he could even refine the rejuvenation pill. For a moment, many female disciples couldn't help but look at Yayu, with a bit of eagerness in their eyes. The rejuvenation pill, for women, is much more valuable than other 6th grade pills of the same level, or even 7th grade pills. The 5th grade Jade Face pill can maintain one's appearance for a period of time, while the rejuvenation pill can keep one's appearance at a certain age without changing. With the existence of the rejuvenation pill, it means that one's appearance will not change in the future. Before returning to the Void Realm, the value of this rejuvenation pill is comparable to that of a 7th grade pill. Of course, after returning to the Void Realm, cultivators can also easily maintain their appearance. But how many cultivators are there in the Return to the Void Realm? Most cultivators are basically stuck in the chi refining realm and the spirit refining realm, and it is difficult to make a breakthrough. Therefore, the appearance of this rejuvenation pill immediately attracted the attention of many female disciples. Although I know Yayu is an alchemist, I didn't expect that he could even refine a 6th grade pill. Is Yayu at least a 5th grade peak alchemist? If I can make friends with him, it may be a lot easier in the future. The disciples present were all moved when they looked at the rejuvenating pill, and their hearts were burning. Yayu remained calm in the face of the disciples' gazes, but he could not hide the joy in his eyes. He had already thought of the disciples' reactions when he gave them the rejuvenating pill. After all, this is a 6th grade pill, and it is also the most popular rejuvenating pill for women. Yayu glanced at Lan Murian calmly, and seeing that her eyes were still calm like a cold pond, he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed, so he had to clasp his fists, and then his eyes fell on Musian, and smiled faintly. Master Mu, I heard that you and senior sister seem to have a good relationship. Why haven't I seen your gift yet? When he was in the Mu family, Musian was able to do evil because the Mu family was rich and powerful. Now in Lianji sect, without the protection of the Mu family, even if he was favored by the master of the library, it was impossible for that master to give Musian a 6th grade elixir, right? After all, elixirs above the 6th grade cannot be bought with spirit stones alone. And even if there is a 6th grade elixir, its value cannot be compared with the rejuvenating pill. This is the advantage of the alchemist, and it is also an advantage that Musian does not have. As this voice fell, many disciples of the sect looked at Musian. In the crowd, Yalingxian also looked at this scene. Her eyes were still calm. For these disciples, the rejuvenating pill may be a very precious thing. But Yalingxian is a natural spirit body. Not only does she practice, but her talent in alchemy is also amazing. She can also refine the 6th grade elixir. Moreover, she still had a lot of stocks of the rejuvenating pill and other 6th grade elixirs in her ring. Brother Mu, I will transfer the ring to you first. Yalingxian suddenly sent a voice message to Musian. Musian couldn't help but glance at Yalingxian, and happened to meet her lively eyes. Knowing her good intentions, he sent a voice message and smiled, forget it this time. I didn't expect Yalingxian to be able to take out the 6th grade elixir casually. Although he knew that she was a small rich woman, he was still a little surprised that she was so rich. Hearing Musian's refusal, Yalingxian frowned slightly, stared at Musian, and said, Brother Mu, you don't have to be so polite to me. I'm not being polite to you, I have prepared the gift. Musian sent a voice message. Sensing the doubts in Yalingxian's eyes, Musian did not explain, but gave her a mysterious smile. Rejuvenating pills are indeed of high value to women. But, he has a better gift. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 173. As if aware of the gazes of several people, Musian remained calm and slowly took out a butter paper bag from the ring. Isn't this a bag used to hold food? What is he doing with this thing? And I seem to smell a fragrance. Is this Osmanthus cake? Someone among the disciples immediately noticed what Musian was holding in his hand. For a moment, everyone's eyes showed a bit of surprise. A woman with a thin veil covering her body and a faint silvery glow came to the end of the crowd at some point. She raised her eyes slightly and stared at the butter paper bag in Musian's hand. With a smile in her eyes and a clear voice, she said, It's interesting. The other disciples gave me pills and medicinal materials, but he gave me a snack instead. The woman's mere opening attracted the attention of many sect disciples, who all looked sideways. When they saw this woman, their eyes were a little more surprised. Many sect disciples in Lianji sect have very good backgrounds, so some people immediately recognized the woman's identity. Saint Maiden of Yaokai, Yaoyu. Yaokai Holy Land has great influence in Dongzhou and has a very deep foundation. The talents of each generation of Yaokai saints are undoubtedly superior to those of the younger generation. Coupled with the physique of the innate Taoist fetus and the bonus of their own appearance, they have naturally attracted the pursuit of many monks. I just didn't expect that this time Lan Mulian's tribulation would even attract the Holy Maiden of Yaokai. And looking at it like this, Yaokai Holy Land seems to have prepared gifts as well. Many people have noticed an exquisite small wooden box held by the Holy Maiden of Yaokai. The wooden box is carved with complex patterns. Just at the first glance, people can realize that what is in it is probably quite large. Precious elixir. After arriving at the refining god, even if you don't eat, there won't be any problems. There is no point in giving you a snack. Not far from the Yaokai saint, there is a young man who is also quite gorgeously dressed. No matter what he is wearing, he is quite gorgeous and can be said to be majestic. The leader of the younger generation in the penalty area, Zhou Hao. The minds of many sect disciples became active. Every year at the Immortal Ascension Conference, the Lianji sect invites people from all the major forces in Eastern Continent to come to the sect to have a look, and those forces will also participate in this Immortal Ascension Conference. It can be said that the Immortal Ascension Conference is the stage where many talents from Dongzhou can emerge. It stands to reason that there are still 2 full months before the start of the Immortal Ascension Conference. Why did the people from the Yaokai Holy Land and the restricted area come here in advance? And from the looks of it, it seems that there are more than just people from Yaokai Holy Land and restricted areas. At the end of the crowd, some sect disciples also saw a few unfamiliar faces. Obviously, these people are not disciples of the Liangyi sect, but geniuses from the Liangyi sect who have just come from the outside world not long ago. After hearing Zhou Hao's words, the saint of Yaokai smiled lightly and said, "Maybe senior sister likes sweet-scented Osmanthus cake." Her words were extremely calm, and there was never any hint of contempt in the eyes of this Yaokai saint for the gift sent by Musian, and the smile on her face was always indifferent. Although it was a bit shabby to give out a sweet-scented Osmanthus cake on such a grand occasion, no matter what, she would not have any fluctuations. The most important thing for the saint of Yaokai is her Taoist heart. She can deal with everything indifferently. This is the saint of Yaokai. Because of this, the saint of Yaokai has very few enemies. On the contrary, it is because of her demeanor and behavior that she has attracted many suitors. Zhou Hao shook his head and smiled lightly. "Fairy Yao you used to practice in Yaokai. I'm afraid you don't know that senior sister Lan has an extremely cold personality and is not interested in most things. Someone from the elders in my restricted area once said senior sister Ian's cultivation speed is probably related to her ignorance of worldly affairs and her concentration on cultivation. How could such a person be interested in 1 or 2 pieces of sweet-scented Osmanthus cake? She is not the kind of girl who will be deceived by a few words." When Zhou Hao said this, his eyes fell on Musian inadvertently, with a bit of sharpness in his eyes. The Yaokai saint's eyebrows were slightly raised, her body seemed to be accompanied by the moonlight, her snow-white skin was shrouded in silver light, and she smiled slightly. "It seems that you don't have a good relationship with the disciple who is giving you the gift now." "I'm just stating a fact." Zhou Hao shook his head and smiled. Then, his eyes fell on the slender back of the girl in purple skirt in the crowd. Although he pretended to be calm on the surface, there was an unconcealable intensity in his eyes as he stared at Ye Lingxian. Ye Lingxian, she is the saint of the forbidden area. Naturally, she is also the object of pursuit of many younger generations in the forbidden area. However, a few months ago, when his younger brother returned to the restricted area, he revealed the fact that Ye Lingxian had already fallen in love with someone, and they were expelled from the Lianji sect because of Musian's design and frame-up. These words naturally aroused the hatred of some disciples in the restricted area. Among them, Zhou Hao was included. In his eyes, Musian has become synonymous with despicable, sinister, and cunning. After all, even if there is no such thing, just knowing that the young lady is pursued by a monk who has absolutely no advantages except his face will still make him feel dissatisfied. Do you know him? Yaokai Saint asks softly. I don't know, but I heard it mentioned by the tribe before. Johao smiled lightly and looked at Musian, who was stepping forward to hand the butter paper bag to Lan Mulian's hand. He continued, when he was in Tianqian City, Musian was obsessed with beauty and did all kinds of evil. He was a dandy boy who was despised by others. But later, something seemed to happen to him. After he came to his senses, his cultivation speed was improved, but it can only be said that he has ordinary talent. Moreover, he is fickle and two-timing. He is a useless young master who can't be more fickle. The indifferent tone and disdain seemed to try to devalue Musian's image to the lowest point in the heart of the Yaokai Saint. Musian. Yaokai Saint repeated softly, confirming that she had no impression of this name, and then smiled indifferently, but didn't take it to heart. She had heard the names of genius cultivators of the same generation. Ya Lingxian, the saint of the restricted area, Bai Ruoxi, the first beauty of Tianqian City, and Wei Mengru, whose presence was weak but whose cultivation was superior to that of other geniuses. In addition, Ya Yu, who just sent out the rejuvenating pill, can barely be considered a genius. In Dongzhou, there are still many geniuses who have not yet been born, and they will probably participate in this Ascension Conference. Among these young geniuses, she had never heard of the name Musian before. If I remember correctly, Fairy Yao Yu seems to have never left Yaokai in the past, and there are still 2 months before the Ascension Conference. Why did she come to Lianji sect in advance this time? Not far from the two of them, a young man with a jade-like face and a white robe asked in a gentle voice. Yao Yu smiled lightly and said, I have received some guidance from Sister Lan in the past. 2 days ago, I noticed the thunder tribulation in Lianji sect, so I asked the elders of Yaokai and came to the sect in advance to congratulate her. Hearing this, many people suddenly realized. The lips of the saint of Yaoqi outlined a faint smile. She was covered with a faint mist, and her skin seemed to be as white as jade through the gauze. However, the thin smoke and the moonlight completely covered her skin. To others, only a vague figure could be seen. A few days ago, the great elder of the Yaoqi Holy Land had deduced that the first generation of the saint of Yaoqi was born in Lianji sect. This time, Yao Yu came to Lianji sect to congratulate one aspect, and the biggest reason was to come for the Green Emperor. If the Green Emperor really still survives in the world, please ask her to return to Yaoqi to control the power. In the future, Yaoqi will be the most prominent in the 9 states. However, when she came to Lianji sect not long ago, she tried to call the Green Emperor with the jade slip constructed by the secret method of Yaoqi, but she did not feel the breath and response of the Green Emperor. This is a very strange situation. It stands to reason that every generation of the saint of Yaoqi can feel the breath of the same source, but when she came to Lianji sect this time, she did not feel any breath about the Green Emperor. The elder's deduction could not be wrong, so it should be that something happened to Senior Kingdi, so she could not be contacted for the time being. The saint of Yaokai thought while quietly looking at Musian not far away. When Musian handed the butter paper bag to Lan Murian, Johao couldn't help but chuckle secretly. Lan Murian had no fluctuations about the elixirs sent by the major main peaks and even the forces outside Dongzhou, let alone a piece of Osmanthus cake. Compared with the elixirs and medicinal materials sent by others, the Osmanthus cake sold in the world is really pitifully cheap. Yeah, you looked at the scene and couldn't help laughing. Master Mu prepared for so long, and he only prepared a piece of Osmanthus cake. Many disciples were slightly agitated, and they were obviously a little surprised by Musian's gift. This Musian is a well-known figure in Tianqian City. As a result, after the sect master's direct disciple was promoted to the Return to Void realm, he sent a piece of Osmanthus cake. Even though senior sister Lan wouldn't say anything, she would probably be speechless in her heart. This can be seen from Lan Mulian's slightly confused eyes at the moment. After taking the butter paper bag handed by Musian, Lan Mulian couldn't help but take a look at the food in the butter paper bag. A portion of Osman thus cake and 2 meat buns. After a brief surprise, she raised her eyes slightly, and there seemed to be a gleam in her cold eyes like a cold pond. After a moment, Lan Mulian's red lips under the gauze opened slightly and stared at Musian. "Are you back to Tianqian City?" "I planned to go back before, but I didn't have time, so I took this opportunity to go back." Musian smiled. "Flying from here and rushing back, won't it be tiring?" Lan Mulian asked. "It only consumed 2 soul replenishing pills and 1 spirit replenishing pill, which is nothing." Musian shook his head and smiled. When hearing the conversation between the two, the eyes of the disciples below moved slightly. "Speaking of which, the nearest city to Lianji sect takes 3 or 4 hours to fly by sword. So where did Musian get his food?" "In order to buy a snack, he spent 3 5th grade pills to fly for 8 hours. Is he crazy?" This thought flashed through the minds of many disciples. However, some female disciples' eyes lit up a little. Women's thinking is completely different from men's. Perhaps in the eyes of male cultivators, this practice is extremely wasteful. After all, the value of 3 5th grade pills can easily crush so many snacks. But in the eyes of female disciples, it is undoubtedly very romantic to rush to Tianqian City for their beloved senior sister. Lan Mulian silently grasped the butter paper bag in her hand, silently staring at Musian's sincere expression and the sunny smile like a spring breeze. After a long silence, her eyebrows relaxed and she said softly, "I like it very much." At the end, a faint smile hung on her cold face, but it was a pity that it was covered with a veil, so it was not very clear. This senior sister just said one sentence, and it set off 1,000 waves among these sect disciples. From just now to now, this senior sister has said thank you to the gift from the main peak. Only the snack given by Musian was said like. This is enough to prove that the gift sent by Musian really won the favor of the senior sister. Musian is too hard, wasting 3 5th grade pills, and even rushing a day and a night, just for a snack. A disciple in the crowd couldn't help but whispered. "But it's very romantic, isn't it?" a female disciple retorted. "But it's just a snack after all. If I knew that my senior sister likes snacks, I would have gone to Tianqian City earlier," some disciples said with regret. For a while, there were a lot of whispers and discussions in the field. Yayu looked at the scene with dissatisfaction in his eyes. He prepared for this anti-aging pill for nearly 2 days, and the medicinal materials alone took a long time to prepare, but in the end, he only got a faint smile from his senior sister. On the contrary, Musian's snack won the senior sister's like. Listening to the whispers in his ears, Musian paused slightly, and suddenly said seriously, "This cake, I will name it as Enlightenment Cake." The voices in the field quieted down for a while, and many people's eyes fell on Musian. Enlightenment Cake. Isn't this just an ordinary cake? Someone looked at Musian with doubt and couldn't help but say. "Master Mu, can you call it Enlightenment Cake just by buying a snack in the city?" Yayu also sneered. Musian ignored him and just said something to Lan Murian. Lan Murian's eyes moved slightly, and she noticed Musian's frank and sincere eyes, and her spiritual consciousness quickly swept over the butter paper bag. Then, as if she had found something in the butter paper bag, she stretched out her bare hand and took out a seed the size of silver from the butter paper bag. The venue suddenly became silent. Then, the breathing of the crowd became much faster, and there was even a little more heat in their eyes. The eyes of the saint of Yaoqi were watery, her red lips were slightly open, and she was also amazed, staring straight at the seed in Lan Murian's hand. Zhou Hao's eyes slowly widened, and his heartbeat kept speeding up. Enlightenment seed. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 174. The Enlightenment Seed is a divine object that can only be obtained from the thunder tribulation of the Hedeo realm, or when experiencing the thunder tribulation of the Hedeo realm and comprehending the laws of the Great Deo with a very small probability. Not to mention the disciples of the sects present, even those ancient families may not be able to produce a Enlightenment Seed. In the final analysis, there has not been a cultivator of the Enlightenment realm for a long time in the past 100 years. It is not that these cultivators are not talented enough, but that the laws of heaven and earth do not allow the appearance of cultivators of the Enlightenment realm. The leader of the Lianji sect, the Green Emperor, the Queen of the Demon realm, and even the gods of the southern wilderness and the Buddha of the western regions, several powerful people of the Hedeo realm, all resonated with the Great Deo a long time ago when the laws of heaven and earth still allowed it. And now in this special period, the return to void realm is already the strongest. The Enlightenment realm has been extinct for a long time. Therefore, in this era, it is almost impossible to see even a single Enlightenment Seed. Even Zhou Hao, who was quite dissatisfied with Muzian, was a little dazed at this time. The eyes of the saint of Yaokai beside her were rippled. Although she was silent, it was not difficult to see her surprise from her slightly opened red lips. For these young geniuses, the value of the Enlightenment Seed can no longer be measured by spirit stones. After all, after refining an Enlightenment Seed, it also means that future practice will be smoother. Even at the peak of return to void, relying on the refined Enlightenment Seed, it is possible to advance to the Enlightenment realm. If someone really goes against the will of heaven and enters the Enlightenment realm when the laws of heaven and earth do not allow it, just thinking about this possibility makes people excited. This person whose name has never been heard before actually gave away all the Enlightenment Seeds in order to pursue a woman? The eyes of all the disciples of the sect were extremely hot, but they all remained calm. This is Lianji sect, and this place is Lianji Peak. No matter who it is, no one dares to cause trouble in such a place. This is also the decision made by Muzian after considering for a long time. The Enlightenment Seed can be refined in just one day, and no one in Lianji Peak dares to have any bad intentions. Moreover, after Lan Murian refines the Enlightenment Seed in the future, the second or even the third thunder tribulation, the secret of the Enlightenment Seed will still be exposed. After refining the Enlightenment Seed, the speed of cultivation will be faster than others, and at the same time, when crossing the tribulation, it will also be mixed with the spiritual energy brought by the Enlightenment Seed. Since it will be discovered sooner or later, it is better to be free and easy. Looking at this scene, many disciples couldn't help whispering, "If I have the Enlightenment Seed, I will probably consider giving it away, but I will still be a little hesitant. This Muzian is really willing to give it away." Hey, forget it, if you really have the Enlightenment Seed and are willing to give it away. I'm afraid you would have refined it a long time ago. The disciple on the side couldn't help but laugh and spoil the show. After all, there are too few people as affectionate as Muzian. If it were me, I would have refined the Enlightenment Seed long ago. How could I keep it and give it to others today? Some disciples couldn't help but sigh. It's not that it's not worth giving the Enlightenment Seed to the senior sister, but people are selfish. Compared with making others stronger, they will naturally prioritize themselves. After refining the Enlightenment Seed, my strength has become stronger. Are you still afraid that I can't pursue a beauty? Maybe it's impossible to pursue a cold beauty like Lan Murian, but as a second choice, it's not impossible to pursue some weaker strength and better looks. Compared with male disciples, many female disciples in the sect looked at Muzian with a little more brilliance in their eyes. There is no female disciple who doesn't like romance. In order to give the senior sister a gift, she rushed back to Tianqian City day and night to buy cakes, and consumed 3 fifth-grade pills on the way. For those male disciples, this approach may be a bit wasteful, but the thinking between men and women is different after all. In the eyes of some female disciples, Muzian's behavior was touching. If I also had such a Taoist partner, I think it would add a lot of color to my boring meditation practice. Several young talents from the outside world were silent, staring at the scene silently. For these talented disciples from various forces, they could give away some elixirs, but if they were replaced with enlightenment seeds, it was not realistic. At the end of the crowd, a monk had a dazzling golden light behind him, clasped his hands together, looked calm, and whispered, Amitabha. There seemed to be golden Buddha light ripples around him, calming himself down. The temptation brought by the enlightenment seeds made his Buddhist heart a little unstable. As this voice fell, many disciples of the sect looked at the monk behind them in surprise, with a little more surprise in their eyes. The Laiyan temple in the western regions actually sent someone here? You know, the western regions are very far away from Dongzhou. Ordinary people may not be able to reach Dongzhou from the western regions by riding for several years. And the words that the other party just said calmed down many people who were tempted. This shows how strong this monk's realm is. The saint of Yaokai stared at the enlightenment seed in Lan Murian's hand. After a long silence, she said faintly, it seems that this Muzian is not just a simple awakening from a dandy boy. This Muzian is not as unbearable as Zhou Hao just said. At least if someone is willing to travel thousands of miles to the city to buy Usman thus cake for her and carefully considers her, even the saint will be a little moved. I guess the same goes for senior sister Lan. But for the holy maiden of Yaokai, this is only a bit heartwarming. The Taoist heart of the Yaokai saint is naturally impossible to be shaken by this. The real purpose of her visit to Liangyi sect this time was for Qing Emperor. As for the rest of the things, they didn't have much to do with her. He was pursuing other girls before, and now he is attacking Lan Mulian. This half-hearted approach is disgusting. Zhou Hao snorted coldly. But, why are you half-hearted? Why don't you do it if I give you 2 or 3 beautiful Taoist companions? A merciless ridicule came from the side, which also made Zhou Hao couldn't help but turn his head and look. Who? The man who spoke was dressed simply, with a few copper coins hanging around his waist. He looked carefree. At this time, his eyes were leisurely looking at the female disciples around him, as if he was looking for something. Shen Yuan, what does this matter have to do with you? Zhou Hao's eyes narrowed slightly, staring closely at the male disciple who looked casual. Hey, what I look down on the most are you ancient families. If you don't know anything else, you will scheming and show hypocrisy. The divine operator narrowed his eyes and smiled. Now if you were allowed to have 3 beautiful beauties at the same time, would you be willing? Or would you choose to spend your life with your true love? He asked. Zhou Hao sneered, of course it's the latter. Do you dare to swear to God? God Shu Yuan asked. Zhou Hao hesitated for a moment, then sneered, why should I swear to God just because of your few words? Look, if you don't dare, don't dare. Why are you pretending to be a big-tailed wolf? The divine operator said with a smile. Yeah, you said in a deep voice, if it is really the person you love, I think most disciples will choose the latter and spend their lives with their loved ones. The divine operator narrowed his eyes slightly, counted with his fingers, and said thoughtfully, if I remember correctly, after you came to the sect, you seem to have had an affair with 3 female disciples. It seems to be half-hearted, right? There are also some male disciples present who seem to have close relationships with many female disciples, and several of them have more than one Taoist companion. At this time, not to mention Ye Yu and Zhou Hao, even many of the disciples present were a little nervous and couldn't adapt to the other party's mean talk. But it's true. For monks, having one foot in 2 boats and half-heartedness are just excuses used when wanting to accuse others. If you are in love with me, no one will care about you. After all, if there was an opportunity to have close contact with several beautiful women, how many of the male disciples present would be able to refuse? It's just that no one has this ability, and they are just a little jealous when they see Muzian's operation. The words of the divine operator touched the sore spot of many people. The conversation between several people naturally attracted Musian's attention, and his eyes fell on the sloppy-looking young man not far away, with some doubts in his eyes. Lan Mulian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he said in a clear and sweet voice, "The senior brother of Tianji Peak." When the sect disciples present heard this, their eyes couldn't help but fall on this sloppy young man, as if they were recalling his identity. Elder brother of Tianji Peak. I seem to have never heard of this name. It's true that I have never heard of the name Shen Yuan. Is there really such a person in our sect? Someone couldn't help but hesitate. I remembered it. I heard from my senior sister before that when the senior brother of Tianji Peak was still in the sect, he used to spy on other people's secrets, which caused a lot of trouble in the main peaks and offended many people. Later, many disciples surrounded him and sneaked out of Lianji sect one night, and no one has seen him again since then. I didn't expect that there are still so many people who remember the past experiences of brother Shen Yuan. It's such an honor, Shen Yuan said with a smile. Then, he looked at Musian again and said doubtfully, "Junior brother, I see that your hall is dark, as if something big is going to happen in the future. If I can have 50,000 spirit stones, I may be able to spend this time for you." Close. There is something interesting about this person. He actually cheated me. Musian smiled slightly and said warmly, "Thank you for your concern, senior brother, but if I am destined to suffer this calamity, then let it happen." The divine operator was about to continue speaking. At this moment, he suddenly seemed to notice something, his face changed slightly, and he said to himself, "It's not good, someone is coming. Everyone, we will see you later." After saying that, Yu Jian turned around and fled in panic like a bereaved dog, as if he was avoiding something. As the farce ended in a hurry, Lan Mulian quietly withdrew his gaze, staring at Musian, his small lips under the gauze slightly pursed, and said through the voice, "Where did you come from, this kind of enlightenment?" "The waiter gave it to me when I went to Kaihai Inn to buy sweet-scented Osman thus cake," Musian said with a smile. Lan Mulian curled her lips and naturally didn't believe it. "The seed of enlightenment will be of great help to your future practice. Take it back and refine it later." Musian reluctantly replied via voice, "The seed of enlightenment is of no use to me, it will run into the natural furnace of its own accord." After a brief silence, Lan Mulian said with a somewhat teasing tone, "Brother priest, your natural furnace cauldron is just like you." "What's the same?" Musian asked confused. "I want everything," Lan Mulian said calmly. Musian. Senior sister is getting better at insulting people. She wasn't like this before. Musian sighed in his heart, then noticed the teasing in Lan Mulian's eyes, knowing that she was not really angry, so he turned around and left without worry. Ya Lingxian looked at the boy who returned to her side, raised her head and said with a smile, "Brother Mu is really generous and generous. He can even give away the enlightenment seed." The voice was indifferent, but there was obviously some sarcasm in the tone. Musian had expected this, shook his head and sighed, and said in a voice transmission, "The enlightenment seed is useless to me, and senior sister has taken good care of me in the past. If I can really enter the enlightenment realm in the future, my safety will be more guaranteed. You also know that your brother Mu offended a lot of people in Tianqian city before. If they become stronger and come to trouble me in the future." Musian looked very helpless. Ya Lingxian frowned, obviously unhappy, and said, "I can protect you too." Musian showed a relieved smile and said, "I believe in Sister Lingxuan's talent, and I will trouble you when the time comes." Hearing Musian's praise, Ya Lingxuan's eyebrows relaxed and nodded gently. "When I inherit the inheritance, I will take Brother Mu back to the restricted area to accompany me, so that Brother Mu will not have to worry about any enemies," she said. If Ya Lingxian really becomes the next master of the restricted area in the future, it would be fine to accompany her to live in the restricted area for a few days. Musian smiled and nodded. Next, several forces from the outside world presented gifts, and Lan Mulian thanked them one by one, adhering to her usual style. The saint of Yaoqi also handed over a delicate little wooden box with a smile, saying, "Senior Sister Lan, congratulations on your spiritual return to the void. It's not a valuable item, I hope you don't dislike it." Lan Murian smiled sweetly, making everything around her look pale. If Nirvana silk is not valuable, then there is probably nothing valuable. Nirvana silk, this thing is only produced in Yaoqi. If Nirvana silk is used to make clothes, it is not only beautiful, but also has a strong protective effect. If there is no enlightenment seed given by Musian before, this Nirvana silk will probably cause a lot of discussion. Musian's eyes fell on the small wooden box in the hands of the saint of Yaoqi, and his eyes were a little thoughtful. These sect disciples may think of making clothes when they see Nirvana silk, but what Musian thinks of at this moment is stockings. If the Nirvana silk can be dyed black and white, perhaps it can be made into quite smooth black and white silk, and then let Sister Ruoxi Mengru and the others wear it. When thinking of this, Musian's eyes could not help but be more excited and expectant. On the other side, after the gifts were delivered one by one, Lan Murian smiled and thanked everyone again, and then sent a message to the saint of Yaokai. "Fairy Yao Yu and I haven't seen each other for a long time. If you have time, why don't you come to my pavilion and sit down?" The saint of Yaokai smiled and nodded, "That's what I meant." She also wanted to investigate some details about the Qing Emperor. And, she really hadn't seen Sister Lan for a while. With the end of the congratulations, the lively Lianji Peak became much quieter, but the fact that Musian went to Tianqian City specially for Sister today also spread unconsciously in the sect. Some disciples disdained this waste of elixirs, but most of them expressed understanding and even envy. At this time, in the Lianji Peak, in a rather quiet and elegant villa, Lan Mulian personally poured a cup of tea for the saint of Yaokai, and then talked to her about what happened recently in Dongzhou. After a while, the saint of Yaokai suddenly asked casually, "Speaking of which, when I came to Lianji sect today, I heard that there seemed to be some commotion in the pilgrimage hall a few days ago. Sister, do you know what happened at that time?" At the end, her eyes gazed at Lan Mulian gently. These two beauties are both as charming as fairies, but they have different styles. Facing the curious question of the saint of Yaokai, Lan Mulian shook his head gently and said, "I have never been to the pilgrimage hall, but many disciples went there at that time. If Fairy Yao Yu is interested in this matter, you can ask the disciples who were there at that time later." Hearing Lan Mulian's answer, the saint of Yaokai was inevitably disappointed, but she did not continue to ask. Sister is really popular in the section. There are even disciples who are willing to give their enlightenment seeds to her Yaokai saint side. Lan Mulian calmly took a sip of tea, her eyes cold, and said, "That junior brother is quite special. He can't be compared with other disciples." "Does it mean that Sister also has some feelings for him?" Yaokai saint asked with a smile. "That's right. After all, with Lan Mulian's personality, if she is not interested in the disciple named Musian, she will not accept the enlightenment seeds. After all, anyone with a discerning eye can see Musian's feelings for Lan Mulian. For the gift, they went to Tianqian City to buy cakes. No matter how you think about it, they don't seem to have an ordinary relationship. And that Musian even decorated the cake with an enlightenment seed. I'm afraid Musian himself only has that kind of holy object, but he gave it to Sister Lan." When Yaokai saint thought of this, it seemed as if a blue lightning flashed through her mind. Come to think of it, how is it possible for a cultivator in the spirit refining realm to have the seeds of enlightenment? It goes without saying that the enlightenment seed that Musian obtained must be the inheritance left by an ancient great power in the past. And in Lianji sect, there are only two people who can be called ancient great powers. One is the sect master, and the other is Ling Long. The sect master is ruled out first, and Ling Long, that kind of existence represents the luck itself. People with great luck may not be able to attract Ling Long, and naturally it is impossible. Then the question is, where did Musian's enlightenment seed come from? In addition to these two powerful people in the Hedeo realm, there is actually another existence, who is also in the Hedeo realm. That existence is the first generation saint of Yaokai mentioned by the elder, Kingdi. The clues in her mind were connected together, making Yaokai saint slightly aware, and her calm state of mind could not help but ripple, and the fingers holding the teacup trembled slightly. She raised her head and stared at Lan Murian, and her red lips opened slightly. Sister, do you know where Musian lives? So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 175. Musian. Lan Murian's eyes moved slightly, staring into the eyes of the saint of Yaoqi, and whispered, "What are you looking for him for?" The saint of Yaoqi hesitated for a moment, and then whispered, "To be honest, the great elder of my Yaoqi had deduced the secrets of heaven before, and got the news that the Green Emperor might still be alive, and in Lianji section. I have never sensed the breath of the Green Emperor." Lan Murian shook his head gently. The Green Emperor at that time had only a trace of spiritual consciousness, and he also deliberately blocked his own breath. Unless he was like the several leaders who saw the Green Emperor with their own eyes at that time, it was impossible to realize the existence of the Green Emperor. In fact, I also had such doubts when I came to Lianji section. For example, there was a problem with the deduction of the Great Elder, or the senior Green Emperor didn't want to be disturbed by others, so he blocked his own breath. The saint of Yaoqi stared at Lan Murian, and said in a clear and pleasant voice, "But now it seems that there may be a third possibility." Lan Murian's eyes flickered slightly, just staring at the saint of Yaoqi, but didn't speak. Could the enlightenment seed that Musian got be given by Senior Kingdi? Saint Yaoqi asked. Lan Murian's eyes were full of contemplation. "So you want to ask him about the situation?" Saint Yaoqi smiled and nodded. "It is impossible for the sect master and Senior Linglong to give him the enlightenment seed for no reason, so I have this guess." When Lan Murian heard this, he looked at Saint Yaoqi with a bit of strangeness in his eyes. "Let's not talk about the master, but Senior Linglong, if she has the enlightenment seed, she may not give it to Musian." Lan Murian stared at the saint of Yaoqi calmly and said, "He is in Tianhe garden of Liulai Palace." After a slight pause, she continued, "However, that person is not as honest as he seems, so be careful." The saint of Yaoqi smiled sweetly, "I know my limits." On the other side, Musian flew on his sword and took Yalingxian away from Lianji Peak, strolling with the girl in front of the pavilion of Liulai Palace. Yalingxian seemed to remember something important, turned her head slightly and looked at Musian, saying, "By the way, what is the path that Brother Mu took in the refining spirit realm?" She had asked Musian this question before, but at that time, the other party was always mysterious and refused to answer directly. The girl was naturally a little concerned when she thought of this now. Musian shook his head and said, "The path I took cannot be explained in a few words. If you have a chance later, you can experience it firsthand." He looked at Yalingxian with a meaningful look. Yalingxian couldn't help but glared at Musian and said lightly, "If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. You are deliberately keeping it a secret. What do you mean by experiencing it firsthand later? Could it be that the path he walked on can only be effective by kissing and hugging?" Walking side by side with Yalingxian in the square, Musian unknowingly sent her to the front of the villa. Musian gently stroked Yalingxuan's hair and said, "Go, Qianer should be waiting for you." However, Yalingxian hesitated and said, "Brother Mu, won't you come in and sit for a while?" Later Musian combed Yalingxuan's hair with his fingers and said leisurely, "There should be a guest later, so I have to prepare in advance." "Guest?" Musian nodded gently and said, "It's a guest I have never met before." Yalingxuan's eyes revealed a trace of doubt, and she whispered, "Since you have never met before, how did Brother Mu know that the other party would come to you?" Musian smiled and stared at Yalingxian, saying, "If the other party is smart enough, he will definitely come. Not long ago, there was such a big commotion in front of the pilgrimage temple, and during Lan Murian's tribulation, many genius disciples from the outside world came, including the Yaokai Holy Land. He had just sent out a seed of enlightenment before, and anyone who was not a fool would wonder where the seed of enlightenment came from. There are only three possibilities: the sect master, the spirit dragon, and the pilgrimage hall cave heaven not long ago. There are still 2 months before the Ascension Conference, and among the people present just now, there are already disciples from various forces such as the Western regions, the Forbidden Zone, and the Yaokai Holy Land. Everyone has his own purpose. The people in the Forbidden Zone, needless to say, they should come for Ye Lingxian. He didn't know the purpose of the monk from the Western region, but the Yaokai Holy Land would send a contemporary saint girl at this juncture. It's inevitable that people will imagine. Simply to send a gift? Or, have they realized the existence of the Green Emperor, so they sent someone to confirm this matter? If it was for the Green Emperor, then Musian's enlightenment seed just now also released a message to the Yaokai saint girl. I know the news about the Green Emperor. Although I originally planned to go to Yaokai, since the other party has come, then this is also an opportunity for communication. Sister Lingxian, do you like stockings? Musian suddenly asked. Ye Lingxian hesitated and asked, what is that? Well, it's similar to socks. Musian looked down at Ye Lingxian's graceful figure. A thin purple ribbon around her waist outlined her slender waist. Her long legs like white jade emerged from under her skirt, and her jade feet were wearing a pair of small embroidered shoes with cloud patterns. This figure, if she wears stockings, must be very beautiful, Musian admired in his heart and said, I will give you a few stockings later, and you will understand. Ye Lingxian frowned slightly and whispered to herself, I always feel that Brother Mu is up to something bad. As a natural spirit, she can naturally detect the longing contained in Musian's eyes just now. That is the longing of having a bad idea. Musian shook his head helplessly and smiled, does Sister Lingxian still think I will hurt you? Ye Lingxian glared at him and whispered, you won't hurt me, but you always have bad ideas from time to time. When Qian'er accepted the inheritance at Daofen before, she wanted to stay at night at that time. At the end, even a girl like Ye Lingxian who can treat everything calmly couldn't help but blush. I was just worried that you would be lonely, so I wanted to stay and accompany you, Musian said, holding Ye Lingxian's hands with both hands. Almost at this moment, he suddenly felt a thorn in his back, as if someone was staring at him. Musian seemed not to notice, and looked down at Ye Lingxian. She seemed to be shy, her curled eyelashes trembled, and she turned her head slightly, leaving Musian with only an attractive snow-white neck and a flawless face like white porcelain. An ambiguous atmosphere was brewing between the two. After an unknown amount of time, Musian said, it's almost time, I should go. Until he saw the girl off and walked into the villa, Musian stretched his lazy waist, turned his head and looked at a huge rock in the corner, and smiled, you are quite good at hiding. How long are you going to hide? If you don't come out, I'm going back. As Musian finished speaking, a young man in a white robe and with an upright figure walked out from behind a huge rock. People from the restricted area, Musian asked. Zhou Hao just looked at Musian calmly and said coldly, stay away from my lady in the future. You should know the difference in status between you and her. There will be no result between you two. As for Senior Ling Long, I don't know why she lives in your villa, but she is the auspicious beast of the Lianji section. If you go to the restricted area in the future, she will not accompany you. This is also a warning to Musian that he should retreat when he sees difficulties. In the final analysis, the gap between a playboy from Tianqian City and the queen who will inherit the position of the restricted area in the future is like an insurmountable gap. Musian and Ye Lingxian are not suitable. If he is more sensible, he should retreat when he sees difficulties. If the other party is a fool, he doesn't mind teaching him a lesson at the Ascension Conference in the future. If a normal person hears those indifferent words that seem to be taken for granted, they will be angry, but Musian is not angry at all, but rather quite relieved. I finally look like a protagonist. If he hadn't awakened his memory, Johao should have gone to Yayu to say this. However, Johao said it to him now. That's great. Musian was in a good mood, feeling Johao's cold eyes, and turned his head to look at the villa behind him. Lingxian, your servant is looking for you. The moment the voice sounded, Johao's face changed, and he glared at Musian and said, Musian, you can't afford it? You followed Lingxian and me all the way to the villa, wasn't it to see your young lady? Am I not kind enough to help you call her out? Musian couldn't help but laugh. Johao's face was gloomy, his heart was beating wildly, and he turned around and left the glass palace without looking back. When he came to Lianji sect this time, the elders in the restricted area specifically told him not to interfere with the young lady's affairs. After all, the Linglong behind Musian has a special identity. If there is really a special relationship between the two, it still needs to be carefully considered. And if he annoys the young lady, he will be punished when he returns to the restricted area. Johao originally planned to endure it, but he couldn't bear it after seeing Musian and his young lady being so intimate in the glazed palace. But he didn't expect that Musian couldn't play with it and wanted to call the young lady out without saying a word. If she found out, he would inevitably be in big trouble. On the other side, Musian looked at Johao's figure turning away, and she couldn't help but understand a little. It seems that this man is afraid of her young lady. However, if he shouts from here, the people in the other courtyard can't hear it at all. He just wanted to scare the other party casually, but he didn't expect the effect to be so good. Musian returned to Tianhe Garden, lit a candle in front of the courtyard at night, and then began to make tea. After waiting for a while, Wei Mengru's cold voice suddenly came from beside him. The saint of Yaokai is outside, and she said she wants to see you. Is she really here? Musian gently put down the teacup in his hand. Please let her in. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 176. Musian was quietly waiting for the arrival of the Yaokai saint in the courtyard. At the same time, he was drinking tea leisurely with a teacup, looking at Wei Mengru who was standing next to him, and the round, beautiful, and cold face of the maid. Pretty face. Although many men always say that they are in control of their looks, feet, and ladies, in fact, to put it bluntly, it just means, they are just lustful. Musian had to ask whether Wei Mengru or Biruoxi was more beautiful, but he couldn't tell. After all, they each have their own characteristics. The maid tends to be aloof, and she knows her young master very well, and even knows all the bad things he has done in the past. Therefore, the strategy is extremely difficult, and she often shows contempt, disgust, etc. towards him. But this gave Musian a great desire to pursue. Knowing that the other party is aloof, elegant, and refined, people can't help but want to get her, and then order her, and watch her look humiliated or shy. As for Biruoxi, she also followed the path of a cold goddess in the past, and she disliked Musian quite a lot, so one can't help but imagine how she would react when she fell in love with him. Facts have proved that girls are really great when they become lovable when they are in love. After Musian glanced up and down at Wei Mengru several times, Wei Mengru immediately noticed the young master's gaze that was darting back and forth on her. She glanced at Musian coldly and said, "What are you looking at?" "Look at you," Musian said. "Watch what I do." Sister Mengru's aura has become much stronger. It seems that she is about to reach the 8th level of the divine level, Musian asked. Seeing Wei Mengru give a faint hum, Musian couldn't help but sigh and said, Sister Mengru's talent is really amazing. How did she do it? Among the people Musian knew, even Byruoxi was barely on par with Wei Mengru, and with the blessing of the aura of heaven, the maid's cultivation speed was already ridiculously fast. If you can concentrate on meditating and practicing every day, you can do the same, Wei Mengru said lightly. Her long snow-white legs under the skirt were wearing a pair of small embroidered shoes. Her long hair was scattered on her back, and the tail of her hair was simply tied with a thin ribbon. Tie up. It's impossible for me to reach this level even through meditation. Musian shook his head and smiled. He is still a little bit conceited about his talent. After all, talent is innate. Even if it is supplemented by acquired skills, he can be proud of most of the sect disciples, but there is still a gap compared to geniuses like Wei Mengru. Speaking of which, I recently discovered a very interesting costume. Are you interested in trying it next time, Sister Mengru? Musian attempted to fish. Not interested, however, the maid didn't take the bait at all and responded coldly. It's for the sake of Sister Mengru. You can give it a try next time, Musian said kindly. Wei Mengru didn't bother to respond, because she knew that her young master definitely had no good intentions. At this time, Wei Mengru raised her head and glanced at the woman outside who was walking along the path in the garden. She quietly withdrew her gaze and said, The saint of Yaokai will not come to you for no reason. Don't be obsessed with beauty and careless. After saying that, Wei Mengru turned and left, her back twisted like heat, and disappeared from sight in the next moment. Musian held the teacup and looked at the leaving figure of the maid, but his face showed a solemn expression. It seems that it is a bit too difficult to let Sister Mengru wear black and white silk on both legs in the future. There is a long way to go. Musian gathered his thoughts and looked up at the noble and elegant fairy not far away. The saint of Yaokai also noticed Musian's gaze, and looked at her. Her red lips moved, and she said with a smile, Mr. Mu, I'm sorry for disturbing you. The hairpin of the saint of Yaokai is very neatly arranged, with a golden jade hairpin inserted in it. The golden lines are connected with small and beautiful pearls, and the tassels sway gently as she moves around, which is quite beautiful. But the most attractive thing is not the swaying tassels, but the tulle-like dress. The dress exudes a faint silver glow, highlighting the snow-white skin of the Yaokai saint. It's a pity that Musian could never see clearly what the other person's figure was like, either because of his own physique or because of his clothes. But judging from her temperament, we can tell that she is definitely a top-notch beauty. Musian showed a shy smile and said, Fairy, you're welcome. Please sit down. With that said, he greeted the Yaokai saint to take a seat, and then slowly made some tea. The saint of Yaokai showed a faint smile and said, The gift that Mr. Mu gave to Senior Sister Lan today is really surprising. When I left, the disciples of the sect were still talking about it. I think Senior Sister can also express this affection, feel it exactly. Musian shook his head and smiled, Senior Sister took good care of me in the past, so I just want to do something for her as much as I can. The saint of Yaokai smiled calmly, not only the enlightenment seed, but even the seemingly simple Osman thus cake also contains a lot of deep feelings, which is really admirable. Having said this, I couldn't help but look at Musian more. Judging from his appearance alone, she couldn't see what was so attractive about Musian. Although Musian is indeed extremely handsome, in the final analysis, it is impossible for such a proud woman as Senior Sister Lan to be attracted to Musian just because of her face. As for talent, that's not to say that Musian's talent is not enough. With Musian's current strength in the God-refining realm, he can be regarded as a genius among many disciples. But Lan Murian is the direct disciple of the sect master, and the saint of Yaoqi knows the cold personality of that senior sister very well. Such a cold woman would not be attracted by Musian's talent or face. If it was before, the saint of Yaoqi also found it difficult to understand Musian's charm. Until today, when she saw the enlightenment seeds given by the other party and the sincerity of traveling thousands of miles to buy Osmanthus cake, she understood a little. In the past, the senior sister served as an examiner and lived in Tianqian City for a period of time. I made an appointment with her to invite her to taste the best Osmanthus cake in Tianqian City, but there was no chance. Musian paused and continued, so I want to take this opportunity to go to Tianqian City. The saint of Yaoqi smiled brightly, hearing what Mr. Mu said, I am a little interested in the cake. Musian smiled without saying anything. Although this fairy has a good temperament and matches his XP, it will make people want to play with her. But he did not say anything like if the fairy wants to eat Osmanthus cake, I can go buy it. This Yaoqi saint obviously put her status higher and looked down on him. It's not that the Yaoqi saint is arrogant, but she grew up in Yaoqi from childhood to adulthood and was admired by her peers, so the tone and demeanor when she spoke would naturally be a little arrogant. At this time, taking the initiative to say this, the status of both parties will be more unequal, and the image of a licking dog will be formed. Musian changed the subject lightly, the fairy came to me today, there must be something important. The Yaoqi saint smiled and nodded, Mr. Mu is really smart. To be honest, I came to Mr. Mu today to ask you something. Please speak, Fairy Musian said. The saint of Yaoqi sipped the tea, which made her rosy lips more moist, and said, the enlightenment seed is only available to cultivators in the enlightenment realm or even the Hedeo realm. It seems that Master Mu has gained a lot of opportunities in the sect. When she said this, her indifferent smile was filled with expectation. Musian pondered for a moment and said, I did get some opportunities in the sect before. It's a long story. The saint of Yaoqi's eyes flickered, and she subconsciously wanted to look up and stare at Musian, but she finally held back. She maintained the cold attitude that the saint of Yaoqi should have, waiting for him to continue speaking. However, Musian did not say anything. The saint of Yaoqi opened her red lips slightly, and wanted to ask several times, but she felt very aggrieved, as if she was listening to the wonderful content of a book, but was suddenly broken. But in the end, she still resisted the urge to ask further questions, because she saw Musian took out a butter paper bag from the ring and put it on the table. What is this? A trace of doubt flashed in the eyes of the saint of Yaoqi. I bought some other food when I went to Tianqian City before. If you are interested, you can try it, Musian said. There was a trace of surprise in the eyes of the saint of Yaoqi, as if she did not expect Musian to bring other snacks back after going to Tianqian City this time. You know, after reaching the realm of refining spirits, it doesn't matter if you don't eat or drink. Tasting snacks is purely to satisfy yourself. This Musian is really good at enjoying himself. When the saint of Yaoqi thought of this, she was about to speak, when suddenly a beautiful song came from Tianhe Garden. A. The song was filled with sadness and gracefulness, and there was a kind of magic that made people feel moved. It seems that Miss Lin Ling smelled the fragrance of food in the house. Musian smiled and looked at the saint of Yaoqi and said, sorry, I may have to leave for a while. The saint of Yaoqi smiled and said, no problem. After a while, after Musian fed the spirit dragon, he returned to the courtyard and looked at the fairy who was quietly waiting in the courtyard. He smiled and said, there are other people in this villa meditating and practicing. It's not convenient to chat. Why don't we go out and talk while walking? Bairuoxi had just been meditating in the house. The singing of the spirit dragon would wake her up from meditation. If she saw this scene, it would be a bit troublesome. Although Musian didn't have any thoughts about this fairy, it would be better to go outside to relax in order to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings. The saint of Yaoqi smiled brightly, okay. Outside the glass palace is a green lake, quiet and elegant, with green vines crawling on the shore, surrounded by lush greenery, and many stone chairs for people to rest are placed near the vines. The two walked along the lakeside, chatting about cultivation. The saint of Yaokai was also interested in Lan Mulian's affairs, so she asked a lot about Lan Mulian's time in Tianqian City. Then, Muzian suddenly said casually, "By the way, the Nirvana silk that the fairy gave to my sister this time is the same material as your dress." The saint of Yaokai nodded slightly and said, "Nirvana silk is one of the products of my Yaokai holy land. It can resist the attack of foreign enemy spirit consciousness to a certain extent. This dress is made of Nirvana silk. I wonder if the fairy still has stock. I am interested in Nirvana silk and want to buy some," Muzian asked. The saint of Yaokai smiled lightly and said, "Mr. Mu doesn't know that Nirvana silk is also rare even in Yaokai, and it is basically not auctioned. With the strength of Yaokai Holy Land in Dongzhou, it is indeed not necessary to auction this rare material for spirit stones. However, since you are a friend of senior sister Lan, I have some scraps of Nirvana silk. If Master Mu doesn't mind, I can give you some." "The stockings have been found," Muzian smiled and said, "Thank you, Fairy. Fairy Yao Yu, I am also interested in this Nirvana silk. I wonder if you can sell me some." At this time, an abrupt voice suddenly came from not far behind the two of them, interrupting Muzian's voice. Muzian glanced slightly and saw a young monk dressed in a rather noble manner walking towards him. "Brother Zhou, you don't seem to live in the glazed palace, right? Why are you running to my glazed palace?" Muzian smiled, as if he was an old friend who had not seen each other for many years. Zhou just snorted coldly, ignoring Muzian. His eyes fell on the saint of Yaoqi, and he said with a smile, "Fairy Yao Yu, I am actually interested in Nirvana silk. I wonder if you can sell me some." The saint of Yaoqi kept a calm smile, looking at the genius boy from the restricted area, but her mind gradually became active. If we only look at the surface, it is naturally the best way to give this Nirvana silk to the people in the restricted area. After all, it is more cost-effective to make friends with the geniuses in the restricted area. But Muzian, whether it is the other party's humility or the relationship with Lan Murian, she also does not want to refuse. Looking at the saint of Yaoqi who seemed to be hesitant, Zhou took out a crystal clear gem from the ring. Aurora crystal. The saint of Yaoqi stared at the gem in Zhou's hand with some surprise. Aurora crystal, this is a special crystal that can only be produced in the forbidden area. Its value is almost the same as gold in the mortal world, but this aurora crystal can be inlaid on clothes. Just one of them can speed up the circulation of spiritual energy. Although the blessing is not much, this aurora crystal is very beautiful. Even a woman like Yaoqi Saint is a little moved by such a crystal. If this aurora crystal is exchanged for Nirvana silk, it is acceptable. Yaoqi Saint's eyes flickered slightly, as if thinking about something. Zhou couldn't help but glance at Muzian, and a faint smile appeared on his face. This is the gap between the forbidden area and ordinary families. His starting point is also the end point that Muzian can never reach in his life. Just because he was born and raised in the forbidden area, and he is also the most beloved grandson of the fourth elder. Most of the other clansmen may not be able to produce such a crystal. "Master Mu, if you know what's best for you, just leave Miss Lingxian and I'll give you this Nirvana silk," Zhou suddenly said in a voice transmission. "This aurora crystal may be a rare item for you, but I can take out more than 10 of them. Even the reincarnation water, I have taken it once in the past," he said coldly. This was also intended to make Muzian feel inferior and give up. Muzian pondered for a moment and also said in a voice transmission, "But I can't bear to leave her." Zhou frowned slightly, not understanding what Muzian said. "Your lady's lips are very soft, I can't bear to leave her." The spiritual energy around him spread almost at that moment. Zhou's eyes were filled with anger, the cauldron in his body was almost unstable, and the spiritual energy surged. But when he thought of his brother being expelled from the sect because he was framed by Muzian and made trouble in the glazed palace, he suppressed his anger, but his eyes were always fixed on Muzian. Muzian gave him a thumbs up, looking gentle and kind. Then, his eyes fell on the saint of Yaoqi, and he said in a voice transmission, "The fairy's guess is right. I got the enlightenment seed from the pilgrimage hall." The saint of Yaoqi raised her eyebrows slightly, as if she was a little surprised that Musian suddenly mentioned this at this time. Then, Musian's voice came to her ears again. "I know the news about the Green Emperor." A fallen leaf fell on the lakeside, rippling. The atmosphere suddenly became quiet. After a brief daze, the saint of Yaoqi quietly raised her head, her eyes reflected the ripples of the lakeside, staring at Musian, and her voice trembling. "Mr. Mu, are you serious?" So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 177. Do you really know about Senior Kingdi? The saint of Yaokai asked again, her beautiful eyes staring straight at Musian, and a light suddenly appeared in her eyes that were always calm. Zhou Hao saw this scene, and his brows frowned inadvertently. Although he didn't know what the two said, from the reaction of the saint of Yaokai, Musian obviously said something that made the saint of Yaokai excited. It seems that Musian is not as useless as his brother said. Zhou Hao's eyes flickered slightly, with a bit of thought in his eyes. If Linglong chose Musian by chance, then the design to drive away his brother and the servants of the clan, and even the conditions that made the saint of Yaokai excited at this moment, this is obviously not something that a playboy can do. Under the gaze of the saint of Yaokai, Musian replied in a voice transmission, "In fact, I originally planned to go to the Holy Land of Yaokai." The saint of Yaokai showed a trace of doubt in her eyes. Could it be that there is something he needs in Yaokai? She thought about it, but she had already made a decision in her heart. She turned her head slightly to look at Zhou Hao, who was not far away from her, and said with some apology, "Brother Zhou, I'm really sorry, I have already made an appointment with Master Mu for this Nirvana silk." Although she rejected Zhou Hao, the pleasant voice seemed to reveal an indescribable magic, which made it difficult for people to feel disgusted. This is one of the abilities of the physique of a natural Taoist fetus. Every Yaokai saint has a physique that can make people feel good. Zhou Hao stared at Musian and said slowly, "Master Mu, you may have some ability to make Fairy Yao Yu change her mind so quickly. However, if you want to be with the young lady with just this ability, you are far from qualified." Musian was stunned and asked back, "Then you are qualified?" Zhou Hao said coldly, "The young lady will inherit the position of the forbidden area in the future. No one is qualified." "You mean, don't let your young lady fall in love?" Musian was shocked. "When someone is good enough in the future and is really worthy of the young lady, we will naturally not stop it," Zhou Hao snorted. "Does that person include you?" "If I am good enough, that's natural," Zhou Hao said lightly. "I understand." What Zhou Hao meant is that if I can't get it, others can't get it either. Musian understood it in his heart and probably knew what this person's mentality was. It's like a person who has a crush on a goddess, but because of his inferiority complex, he has never dared to confess, saying that he will pursue the other person after he becomes better in the future. However, before that, the goddess in their eyes may have been chased away by someone. As for whether he is worthy of Ye Lingxian, Musian is not the kind of person who will feel inferior because the other party's family background or even talent is better than his own. On the contrary, he will only be more relieved. The stronger Ye Lingxian is, the easier it will be for him in the future. If you don't catch the person you like first, you will regret it sooner or later. Moreover, with Ye Lingxian's almost flawless character, if he didn't pursue her when she was a girl, would he wait until she became a great white shark before pursuing her? If he really waited until then, he might not have any chance to pursue her. The girl has already shown her coldness that keeps people away from her. In another year or two, it will be even more impossible to get into her heart. Brother Zhou's awareness is something I admire very much. You should work hard to improve. Fairy Yao Yu and I have other things to talk about, so I'll leave first. Muzian clasped his fists and sincerely wished Zhou well. Zhou stared at Muzian's back, but this time, he didn't speak again. It can be seen from this that even if Muzian said more, he might not listen. However, if Muzian really followed the lady to the restricted area this time, at that time, he would probably know how big the gap between him and the lady was. Once he inherited the inheritance, Ye Lingxuan's talent and strength in the future would be more than one level higher. Such a dazzling light would be enough to make everyone who saw her feel ashamed. Ignorance is bliss. The young master of the Mu family just hasn't realized the young lady's true talent yet. If he goes to the restricted area and truly knows the young lady's majesty, Muzian will know the gap between the two. The saint of Yaoqi and Muzian strolled by the lake. She suddenly asked, "Do you have a good relationship with Miss Lingxian?" Muzian nodded slightly and said, "Lingxian is one of my most beloved sisters. I have always treated her as my sister. The power of the restricted area is much larger than you think, so please be careful," the saint of Yaoqi kindly reminded. Muzian nodded gently, "Thank you for your concern, fairy." The saint of Yaoqi inadvertently changed the topic and asked, "Speaking of which, the news about Senior Kingdi that Mr. Mu just said." "I do know the news about Senior Kingdi, and I also know where she is now." Muzian chose to tell her by voice transmission this time. The saint of Yaoqi slowly stopped and turned her head to stare at Muzian. Before she could speak, Muzian continued, "But I can't take you to see her now." The saint of Yaoqi was puzzled and asked, "Why?" "Senior Kingdi has some health problems, and it is not convenient for him to see people now." Muzian told the truth. "Kingdi is now sleeping in his body. Unless it is absolutely necessary, Muzian will naturally not wake her up." The beautiful brows of the Yaokai saintess frowned inadvertently. Although the other party seemed to have a good relationship with Lan Mulian, based on just a few words from Muzian, it was naturally impossible for her to believe the other party. At this time, Muzian continued, "Although I can't take you to see her, I can make you aware of her existence. You won't let me see Senior Qing Emperor, but you can make me aware of Senior Qing Emperor's existence." There was a trace of doubt in the eyes of the Yaokai saint, as if she could not understand what Muzian said. Under the gaze of the Yaokai saint, Muzian smiled and said, "Anyway, I will take you to a place first, and you will know it soon." Under the leadership of Muzian, they unknowingly arrived at a quiet and elegant garden. The owner of the villa seemed to have been aware of the arrival of the two men. The girl inside unlocked the formation, and then, a pretty face that looked pure and charming appeared in the field of vision. Yeqian raised his head, looked at Muzian with surprise and happiness, and shouted softly, "Brother Mu, why are you here?" Then, his eyes quickly fell on the cold-looking fairy next to Muzian. Seeing her smile lightly at him, Yeqian also smiled back. Then, a pair of green eyes looked deeply at the Yaokai saint, and then said with a smile, "Anyway, come in first." After finishing speaking, he led the two of them to the front of the courtyard. "Isn't Lingxian in front of the courtyard?" Muzian glanced at the courtyard, but did not see Ye Lingxuan's figure. "Sister just went to take a medicinal bath." Yeqian noticed Muzian's gaze and said immediately. As an inner disciple of Daofen, Ye Lingxuan's chi-napping pills can be said to be endless. In addition, Muzian also gave a lot, so Ye Lingxian basically used chi-napping pills every day to speed up his cultivation. "What does Brother Mu have to do with sister?" Yeqian asked next. "I'm not looking for Lingxian, I'm looking for you," Muzian said. Under Yeqian's confused gaze, Muzian said, "The fairy next to me is the saint of the Yaokai Holy Land." "Yaokai Holy Land." Yeqian repeated it, and it seemed that it sounded very familiar. Then, she immediately remembered something important and raised her head and said, "If I remember correctly, Senior Kingdi seems to be a saint from the Yaokai Holy Land." Muzian nodded slightly, then looked at the Yaokai saint and said, "Qian'er is the inheritor designated by Senior Qing Emperor." The saint of Yaokai stared at Yechian calmly with her ancient eyes, and nodded gently. I can feel the original breath from her. But where is Senior Kingdi? She was still a little confused. Senior Qing Emperor, you are in my cauldron. Muzian told the truth. The saint of Yaokai immediately shook her head. Impossible. If Senior Qing Emperor was in your body, I should have been able to detect the original aura in your cauldron immediately. She had used that special jade slip when she entered the Lianji section. If the Qing Emperor was really in Muzian's body, she shouldn't have been unaware of it. Can the fairy detect another cauldron? Muzian asked. The saint of Yaokai was stunned for a moment and whispered to herself, another cauldron. How could a monk have two cauldrons? She originally wanted to ask like this, but the next moment, the saint of Yaokai seemed to have remembered something important and quietly raised her head. Are you a natural furnace? When she said this, she hesitated and said, I'm sorry, can you let me use my spiritual sense to test it? It's not that she doesn't believe in Muzian, it's just that she has heard about the physique of a natural furnace cauldron since ancient times, but has never seen it before, and there are few records of it even in ancient books. Seeing Muzian nod slightly, the Yaokai saint stretched out her slender hands from the fluttering cuffs of her wide sleeves and grabbed Muzian's palm. Yechian's eyes moved slightly as he stared at this scene, his beautiful eyebrows inadvertently frowning. But the girl still knew the basics of people, so she didn't say anything. The spiritual consciousness of the saint of Yaokai slowly swept over Muzian's body, and it was only after she really noticed his two cauldrons that she took out the jade slip in her hand. Almost at that moment, the jade slip in her hand lit up with a faint light. The eyes of the Yaokai saintess lit up with a hint of joy. Senior Kingdi is indeed in his body. She suppressed the joy in her eyes, but she still couldn't hide the excitement in her heart. He didn't expect that Senior Kingdi would appear in front of him in this way. When she thought of this, she was about to take back her bare hands. At this time, when the spiritual consciousness swept across another cauldron, she seemed to vaguely see a wisp of purple spiritual energy mixed in the cauldron, turning the originally completely invisible spiritual energy into a deep purple. How could the spiritual energy in this other cauldron be different from the normal spiritual energy? A trace of doubt flashed across the eyes of the Yaokai saint. Generally speaking, the spiritual energy in the monk's cauldron is void, but the spiritual energy in Muzian's other cauldron is obviously different from the normal spiritual energy. It stands to reason that even the spiritual energy in the natural furnace should be void rather than purple. As soon as this thought flashed through the mind of the saint of Yaokai, she suddenly felt an incomparably sweet aura permeating her spiritual consciousness. This aura made her originally clear eyes a little more misty, and there was an urge that made people want to completely absorb the purple aura. She could feel that this purple spiritual energy would be of great help to her cultivation. Fairy Yaoyu. At this moment, Muzian's gentle call suddenly came to her ears, which also awakened the saint of Yaoqi from her previous days, and she withdrew her hand as if she had been electrocuted. Muzian looked at her with concern and said, "What's wrong with the fairy?" The saint of Yaoqi barely calmed down, shook her head and smiled lightly, "Nothing, I was just thinking about something." When she said this, she couldn't help but look at Muzian deeply. This Muzian's natural furnace is a bit too weird. I didn't expect that Mr. Mu was actually a natural furnace, which is really surprising. The saint of Yaokai's eyes were full of sincere admiration. No wonder Senior Kingdi chose to live in your body temporarily. Just now, she could clearly feel how wonderful the spiritual energy in Muzian's natural furnace was, and even she almost got lost in it. Senior Kingdi was obviously seriously injured, but he was well nurtured in Muzian's natural furnace. This is not a long-term solution after all. Muzian shook his head and sighed. Senior Kingdi was seriously injured, so I have been trying to find a way to reshape her body, but I am missing some important materials. Senior Kingdi is the saint of Yaokai Holy Land. If there is anything that Yaokai Holy Land can do, we will do our best, Yaokai saint said immediately. Muzian nodded and said, if I have to say it, I do need some help from Yaokai Holy Land. The Tiandan Phoenix fruit of Yaokai Holy Land is one of the keys to help Senior Kingdee reshape his body. After I go back this time, I will mention this to the elders and let them prepare in advance, Yaokai Saint replied immediately. In addition, what else do you need? Reincarnation water, Musian said. Yaokai Saint pursed her lips and hesitated a little. If there was no Green Emperor, they might be able to get the reincarnation water by opening the forbidden area. But if it was about letting Green Emperor reshape his body, the forbidden area might think about it again. After all, a female emperor in the Hedeo realm appeared in Dongzhou, that would completely change the current situation in Dongzhou and even Zhuzhou. I will find a way to solve the reincarnation water, Musian smiled. Fairy, just prepare the Tiandan Phoenix fruit. After I go to the forbidden area, I will visit the Yaokai Holy Land. Under normal circumstances, if an ordinary cultivator said this, the Yaokai Holy Maiden would only question it. But the relationship between him and Ye Lingxian, and even the natural furnace tripod in his body just now, made people have to believe the truth of what Musian said. The saint of Yaoqi smiled brightly from the bottom of her heart. No matter what the result is, we will remember the help that Master Mu gave to Yaoqi this time. Musian shook his head modestly and said, Fairy, you are too polite. Senior Kingdee has helped me a lot, and since you are my friend, you are also half of my sister. This is what I should do. The saint of Yaoqi gave Musian a moving smile, and then she took out a small wooden box with exquisite workmanship and said, I didn't bring much nirvana silk when I left Yaoqi this time. If these are not enough, you can come to Yaoqi to find me in the future. Seeing that Musian was about to take out the spirit stone, the saint of Yaoqi took the lead and said, Forget the spirit stone. Since you called me a sister, then take this as a small gift for my brother. Thank you, sister. Musian looked sincere. Yaoqi Saint Maiden did not realize that Musian had changed the way he addressed her. After chatting with Musian for a few words in the other courtyard, she chatted with Yeqian for a while, talking about some details of cultivation that might be encountered in the inheritance of the Green Emperor, and then said goodbye to the two and left. After all, she had received news about the Green Emperor, so she naturally wanted to go back and report the matter to the elders in Yaoqi as soon as possible. It was dim outside at night. After watching the Yaoqi Saint Maiden leave, Musian and Yeqian sat in the courtyard for a while, and then saw Ye Lingxian walking towards the front of the courtyard. Because she had just taken a hot bath, Ye Lingxian's delicate little face was flushed, which was very cute. Sister Yeqian took the initiative to call out. Ye Lingxian looked over and a faint smile appeared on her face. Then, her eyes fell on Musian, and she smiled lightly. Brother Mu, why are you here so late? I thought you should be immersed in the gentleness of Sister Ruoxi at this time. Musian smiled but said nothing. Sister Lingxian's ability to insult people is getting stronger and stronger. I have to find an opportunity to teach her a little lesson. Musian smiled helplessly. Lingxian, your misunderstanding of me seems to be a bit deep. Unexpectedly, Ye Lingxian said with a and smiled slightly, is it really a misunderstanding? As she said that, she had come to the front of the courtyard and sat down. She sat quietly, and her pretty face was set off by a rather loose and casual white lingerie, which instead revealed a sense of innocence. At this time, Yeqian suddenly asked, is the medicinal bath over, sister? Ye Lingxian smiled and said, Qian'er can go now if she wants to take a medicinal bath. Yeqian nodded, then glanced at Musian again, whispered I'll go first, and got up and left the courtyard. At this time, Musian immediately took the opportunity to grab one of Ye Lingxian's soft jade hands. Qian'er just left, aren't you afraid of being discovered? Ye Lingxian glared at Musian and tried to break free. It's so late, we won't be discovered. Musian comforted softly, and instead grabbed Ye Lingxian's hand more enthusiastically. Ye Lingxian glanced at Musian helplessly, and the amplitude of her struggle gradually became smaller. Finally, she lowered her head shyly, which was regarded as tacitly agreeing to his action. The two sat quietly in front of the courtyard, feeling the ambiguity that permeated the courtyard. Musian tilted his head slightly and looked at the shy posture of the girl at this moment. Ya Lingxian was wearing a white inner garment, the fabric was close to her snow-like skin, her eyebrows and eyes were like paintings, and the water drops on her forehead slid down her cheeks and onto her collarbone. Although she didn't put on makeup, the little beauty was still the little beauty, but compared with the classical and elegant in the past, Ya Lingxian at this moment had a more lazy temperament. Think about it carefully, if you want to give Sister Lingxian a little education. It seems to be quite suitable tonight, isn't it? So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 178. Brother Mu, what are you doing? It should be said that Ya Lingxian, who is a natural spirit, is obviously full of anti-gank awareness. Musian had just had some bold ideas in his mind, and Ya Lingxian immediately noticed Musian's malicious eyes, and immediately raised her eyes to look at him, with a face full of vigilance. Sister Lingxian is too alert, Musian couldn't help laughing and said, "Nothing, can't I look at you twice?" Ya Lingxian frowned slightly and said softly, "I always feel that Brother Mu is up to something bad." Musian said helplessly, "Sister Lingxian, do you still think I am a bad person?" Brother Mu was a bad person when he was in Tianqian City, Ya Lingxian snorted without mercy. "I have never done a bad thing in the past, how can I become a bad person?" Musian tried to pull her to let Ya Lingxian relax her vigilance. "That's what you say, but Brother Mu used to use sweet words to deceive ignorant girls, didn't he?" Ya Lingxian said lightly. "I have never deceived any girl." Musian held Ya Lingxuan's little hand, stared at the girl's beautiful profile, and said softly, "Besides, is Sister Lingxian an ignorant girl?" Ya Lingxian raised her snow-white chin proudly and said, "Of course I am not. How could she be the same as those innocent girls?" After all, she saw Musian's nature at a glance, so she tried every means to prevent Brother Mu from getting close to Jian'er. "Isn't that it? Since you are not an ignorant girl, why are you still worried that I will do something bad?" Musian said. Ya Lingxian glanced at Musian and said with a smile, "But who knows if Brother Mu will force me to do something bad? After all, Brother Mu is now in the refining spirit realm. I can't beat Brother Mu with my current strength." When she said this, she bit her lip lightly, her eyes flickered with anxiety, and said, "Brother Mu won't mess around, right?" When she said this, the girl's eyes were obviously teasing. He, now Jian'er is not here, I wonder how you can deal with me alone." Musian laughed unkindly and cooperated with Ya Lingxian very well. At the same time, he quietly put one hand around Ya Lingxuan's slender waist that was only enough to be held in one hand, and then gently held her in his arms. Then, the fingers of the other hand lifted Ya Lingxuan's snow-white chin, and almost at that moment, his eyes could not help but be attracted by Ya Lingxuan's appearance. The girl had obviously just finished her bath and was about to go to bed tonight, so she was wearing a white lingerie for resting at night. Her slightly messy hair hung down beside her classical and delicate oval face. Her lips, which were not painted with rouge, were slightly pursed, revealing an attractive pink luster under the moonlight. Although he had known that Ya Lingxian was very beautiful, Musian couldn't help but sigh after taking such a close look tonight. How could Yu in the past ignore such a beautiful little beauty in the clan and concentrate on practicing wholeheartedly? The background was a courtyard with silver light, a nobleman holding the girl's snow-white chin with his fingers, and a shy girl who turned her face away slightly. This scene looked a bit like Musian teasing a girl. If she was not familiar with Musian in the past, if the other party dared to do this, Ya Lingxian would have slapped him directly regardless of whether the other party was in the refining spirit realm or not. But at this moment, when she was touched by such an intimate action, what rose in her heart was not anger, but inexplicable shyness and nervousness. Although she knew that Musian was a playboy, she was still attracted to him involuntarily. Lingxian couldn't explain the reason now. At this time, she felt a slight breath coming from her pretty face, and she couldn't help but raise her eyes to look at Musian. Looking at the boy's face slowly approaching, she already knew his thoughts in her heart, but at this moment she couldn't bear to push him away, so she had to close her eyes silently. Musian pressed Lingxuan's shoulders with both hands, and the girl's back was close to the stone pillar, allowing the boy to quietly occupy her lips. Musian greedily felt Lingxuan's soft and slightly cool cherry lips. Because she had just finished bathing, there was still an alluring fragrance on her body, which made people feel excited. After an unknown amount of time, their lips parted, Lingxuan's little mouth panted gently, her little hand gently grasped the fabric of the cuffs, her eyes became more and more misty and moist, and she raised her head slightly to stare at Musian's affectionate eyes. "Lingxian, I'll stay with you tonight," Musian said softly. Lingxuan's eyes were a little dazed, and it was not until a long time later that she understood what Musian had just said. She immediately shook her head gently and turned away from him. "Not now." "Does not now mean that it can be done in the future?" Musian held one of Lingxuan's delicate hands and said, "I'm just staying to accompany you to meditate and practice, and I won't do anything bad." Lingxian glanced at Musian with resentment and whispered, "Do you believe what Brother Mu said?" "I keep my word." Musian looked sincere. Lingxian said, "Do you dare to swear to the sky?" "This is meaningless." "How can I operate after swearing?" Musian was helpless. He didn't expect Lingxian to be so vigilant. At this time, Lingxian put a slightly cool little hand on the back of Musian's hand. She looked up at Musian and whispered, "This time I return to the restricted area to accept the inheritance. If I can guarantee that I am intact, it will also be helpful for the inheritance." Lingxian paused and continued, "And has Brother Mu already prepared to explain to my father? Once the inheritance is not perfect, the Lord of the Forbidden Zone will naturally be able to detect the abnormality. At that time, Musian, who has the closest relationship with Lingxian, will naturally become the object of suspicion of the Lord of the Forbidden Zone. But if Lingxian accepts the inheritance, she will not have so many restrictions. So you have always refused to let me stay with you at night, is it because of this reason?" Musian asked, and his heart suddenly understood. If Lingxian hadn't reminded him, he would have had some bold ideas. "Now that I think about it, it is true. In more than a month, Lingxian will return to the Forbidden Zone to accept the inheritance. If her father knew that the little cabbage he raised with great difficulty had been taken away by someone, I wonder how he would feel. It seems that the time for the caning education needs to be slowed down a little bit." Looking at Lingxuan's well-behaved appearance, Musian couldn't help but stroke Lingxuan's head and said softly, "I won't do anything bad without your consent, don't worry." Lingxian thought for a while and said, "If you don't do anything, Brother Mu can stay at night." Musian coughed lightly and said, "I have something to do at night." Lingxian. "Heh, man." Lingxian glanced at this neighbor brother who was full of bad intentions, and suddenly said, "Brother Mu, how about I go to get the reincarnation water for you? You just need to wait for me in Lianji section." She was still a little worried that Musian would cause unnecessary trouble after going to the restricted area. In the restricted area, whether it was Zhoukang or Zhouhao, there were more than one such person. They might not hate Musian, but they just hated having a man with their young lady. And if Musian went to the restricted area with her, I don't know what his father's reaction would be with his personality. "Have you ever thought about what to do if Senior Kingdi doesn't need a bottle of reincarnation water?" Musian asked. Lingxian hesitated and said, "Brother Mu means. What if Senior Kingdi needs to take a bath in the reincarnation water like you did when you were a child?" Musian asked. Lingxian. "If you think about it carefully, it's true. an existence of Kingdi's level may not only need a bottle of reincarnation water to solve it. In the end, even if she doesn't take a bath in the reincarnation water, if she needs to prepare 2 or 3 bottles of reincarnation water, her clan will definitely notice something unusual. After all, Ye Lingxian doesn't need reincarnation water at all now. In this case, it is inevitable that people will be suspicious if the lady leaves the restricted area with so much reincarnation water. What is Brother Mu going to do? Is he really going to find my father? Ye Lingxian asked. Based on her understanding of her father may not agree to this matter. I will take care of this matter. You just need to accept the inheritance with peace of mind. Muzian gently stroked Ye Lingxuan's head and said, if you really want to help me, you should advance to the return to Void Realm as soon as possible. Ye Lingxian nodded seriously. Whether for herself or for Muzian, she needs to advance to the return to Void Realm so that she can protect the people around her. After being intimate with Ye Lingxian in front of the courtyard for a while, Muzian found an excuse to leave the courtyard. Just as Muzian was leaving, he saw a figure hurriedly passing by, and her skirt fluttered gently in the night breeze. Didn't Jianer go to take a medicinal bath? Why is she still here? If I remember correctly, the last time he and Ye Lingxian were in the room, he also happened to see Ye Qian hurriedly leaving. Once can be said to be accidental, but twice, Muzian's eyes were a little more suspicious. Next time, find a time to test Jianer. After thinking of this, Muzian turned around and left the villa. After returning to Tianhe Garden, Muzian did not go back to the house directly, but chose to go to the study to see if he had received any paper crane messages in the past 2 days. He glanced at the table and saw 2 folded paper cranes on the table as expected. One should be from the senior sister, and the other should be from the sect master. Muzian understood in his heart, pulled out a chair and sat down, and then opened the letter. The letter written by the senior sister was more serious. Since the 2 of them met online, she has always maintained her image of a cold senior sister. The content of the letter written this time was roughly to thank him for his gift, and if she had time later, she could go to Lianji Peak to taste Osman Thus cake together. The sect master responded to Muzian's invitation to her to walk in the pilgrimage temple last time. He did not refuse, but did not accept it either. Muzian thought for a moment, picked up the pen and ground it. After a while, after writing the replies to the 2 letters, he released the paper crane. Then, he opened his personal interface. The pink heart frame behind the name and role positioning remained the same, but the titles below gradually increased. Among those titles, Muzian suddenly found a dark green box. The title above was, Inheritance of the Blue Emperor. The bonus brought by this title is that it allows Muzian to use the Blue Emperor's unique skills, the Pure World Blue Lotus. Although it is not as orthodox, it is still the Blue Emperor's unique skills, and it can be used in most future battles. The natural spirit body is Lingxian, the sword fairy body protection is Ruoxi, and the Blue Emperor inheritance is Ye Qian's, but why is there another title? Muzian soon discovered that behind Inheritance of the Green Emperor, there was a 7th title, Holy Body of Heavenly Destiny. Whose physique is this? Muzian looked at the dazzling golden square frame and the 4 golden characters on it with doubt, and couldn't help but hesitate. The Saint of Yaokai is obviously unlikely. Is it one of the several chiefs, or a senior sister? Or is it the sect master? Muzian shook his head gently, quickly gathered his thoughts, and closed the personal interface. There is something he must confirm tonight no matter what. After leaving the study, Muzian saw the yellow-skirted maid sitting in the pavilion in front of the courtyard. Sister Mengru, why are you still outside so late? Muzian smiled and stepped forward to greet her. Wei Mengru glanced at her and said lightly, I thought you wouldn't come back tonight. Sister Mengru is not waiting for me here. Muzian was a little touched. I just came out to enjoy the moonlight and have a cup of tea. Wei Mengru responded coldly, sitting with her slender legs crossed, not treating her own young master as a young master at all. "Where's Ruoxi?" Musian asked. "She is meditating in the house and is about to break through," Wei Mengru said. Then she glanced at Musian again. "Do you seem to be planning to go out? You will go to the restricted area in more than a month. It will be very troublesome if you don't get the reincarnation water by then, right?" "I am planning to go out to confirm the matter of reincarnation water," Musian smiled. Wei Mengru moved her jade neck, as if she wanted to turn her head to look at Musian, but she still maintained her aloofness for the sake of face, and said lightly, "Where are you going?" "If I just go to Lingxuan's father to ask for the water of reincarnation, the other party may not agree, even if I am his future son-in-law." Musian smiled, "But everyone likes to compromise. If I go to ask for the water of reincarnation, the master of the restricted area may refuse me. But if I say at this time that there are demons in the pilgrimage temple, and if I don't take action, it will endanger Dongzhou, then he will not refuse me if I mention the water of reincarnation." Wei Mengru's eyes changed slightly, and she whispered, "Do you want to release the demon cultivators in the pilgrimage temple?" Musian nodded slightly. "But before that, I need to find someone to confirm it." In the end he deliberately kept it a secret, staring at the beautiful profile of the yellow-skirted maid. Wei Mengru finally couldn't help looking at Musian and said, "Who?" "That's right, it's boring to be cold all the time. It would be even better if you can show a little shyness in the future." Musian withdrew his gaze with satisfaction and looked in the direction of Lianji Peak. "The person who has been secretly guiding all this since I entered the section. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 179. "Are you talking about the sect master?" Wei Mengru suddenly asked when she noticed the direction Musian was looking up. "As expected of my personal maid, Sister Mengru really knows everything," Musian said with a smile. Wei Mengru curled her lips. "It's just some basic speculations." As she spoke, she remembered something important and continued, "You went to Tianqian City 2 days ago. Did you visit Mr. Ren by the way?" When they were in Tianqian City in the past, Mr. Ren took good care of both Wei Mengru and Musian. Even when Musian was still a playboy, the old man never disliked him. Therefore, even Musian at that time respected Mr. Ren very much. "I gave him a few bottles of elixir and chatted with him for a while," Musian nodded. Wei Mengru nodded slightly and said no more. After bidding farewell to Wei Mengru, Musian arrived in front of Lianji Peak on his sword and called his senior sister in the peak by sending a message with a paper crane. After waiting for a while, a beautiful woman in a white dress with her feet on clouds quietly appeared in the field of vision in Lianji Peak. "Senior sister," Musian shouted. Lan Murian nodded slightly, glanced at him, and said, "Master is waiting for you in the courtyard. She already knows I'm coming." Musian was a little surprised, but not very surprised. After all, this is a big shark, and it seems that he has been planning something since he just entered the sect, so it is not surprising that he can guess his movements. When he arrived in front of the courtyard, Musian met the peerless Lianji sect leader in a unique and elegant room. One of the few powerful people in the Hedeo realm in the world, she is also a woman that Musian has not seen through so far. She was just as Musian had thought of her in the past, casual, noble, elegant and mysterious. If you didn't look at her insignificant breasts or even her plump and protruding figure, you would only feel a strong sense of awe in front of her. Fortunately, Musian's love for the sect master was greater than reverence, so he didn't act submissive or even lose his composure in front of her. "Sit down, don't be so reserved." Shang Yanfei showed her signature royal sister smile, with a mysterious temperament. "The sect master knew I would come to you." Musian sat opposite her at Shang Yanfei's signal. The Green Emperor just entered your other cauldron not long ago, it's not surprising that you came to me. Shang Yanfei chuckled. This sect master really knows everything. Even the cave where I entered the pilgrimage temple may have been secretly guided by her, Musian said concisely. Senior Kingdi needs reincarnation water and Tiandan phoenix fruit. Tiandan phoenix fruit is in Yaokai Holy Land. If you don't go to them, they will come to you, Shang Yanfei said. However, how do you want to get reincarnation water? She stared at Musian. Musian pondered for a moment and said, when people don't encounter a big enemy, they will only consider their own interests, but once they have a common enemy, they will consider the allies. The strength of the allies can also reduce their own loss of interests. Senior Kingdi said before that the old demon's strength is not as good as before. Even if she is gone, he will also die in another 100 years. So, you want to squeeze out its last value before that? Shang Yanfei raised her eyebrows slightly. But I am a little worried. If the people in the demon world notice it, will they come to rescue or something? When Musian said this, he secretly peeked at the Empress. Shang Yanfei slowly picked up the teacup and drank a sip of tea, which made her lips more moist. 1,000 years ago, the demon world was barren and the entire North Continent was in constant war, but the Demon King did not stop it all, because the way he practiced was related to the power of life and death. After that, the Demon King's skills were perfected and he coveted Dongzhou, so he led the demon cultivators to attack Dongzhou, but he happened to meet the Green Emperor. You also know what happened after that. The Green Emperor suppressed the Demon King with the pure world Green Lotus. Not long after, the adopted daughter of the Demon King succeeded the Demon Queen and quelled the war in a few years. Musian's eyes moved slightly, and he said, the sect master means that if the Demon Queen knew that the first generation of the Demon King was in the Lianji sect, would she not send someone to rescue him? But they are not father and daughter. The Demon King adopted 9 adopted sons and 9 adopted daughters in total, and the one who survived in the end can become his successor, Shang Yanfei said. I understand. Is the first Demon King raising poisonous insects? Musian understood it. Think about it carefully. Does the beautiful snake really not know where the first Demon King is? The pilgrimage hall was shaken more than once. Yang Guhuan probably told the Demon Queen about this news a long time ago. But the other party has not made any move. Is it because he is not sure that the first Demon King is sealed in Lianji sect, or, he doesn't care about the other party's life or death? After listening to Shang Yanfei's words, the answer seems to be very obvious. The Qing Emperor sacrificed himself for Dongzhou. The Lord of the Forbidden Zone is not a stubborn and pedantic person. If you explain the reason to him, he will help you. Shang Yanfei paused, with a hint of teasing smile. However, the Lord of the Forbidden Zone has only one daughter since ancient times, so he loves her very much. Compared to the reincarnation water, he may care more about his daughter's emotional problems. Although he didn't continue to say it, Musian already knew what Shang Yanfei meant. This was indirectly telling him, after hooking up with the Saint of the Forbidden Zone, you have to be mentally prepared before meeting the Lord of the Forbidden Zone. Thank you, Sect Master, for your enlightenment. Musian clasped his fists. Then, he talked to concubine Shang Yan for a few more words, and before he got up and left, he suddenly said, by the way, Sect Master, what I said before about going to the pilgrimage temple to see the peach blossoms. There will definitely be a chance in the future. Concubine Shang Yan smiled lightly, and her elegant and bright eyes stared at Musian quietly. This sounds like next time for sure. Musian bowed again and said goodbye to the Empress. He was just testing the other party a little, not really wanting to introduce this great white shark into the fish pond so early. After leaving the court, Musian saw Lan Murian sitting under the pavilion outside. There were piles of delicious dishes on the table, and the rich aroma of the dishes filled the air. Senior sister, are you having supper so late? Musian came to Lan Murian's side and asked with a smile. Lan Murian glanced at him and said indifferently, "This is not what I want." Although she had someone send it, it was not what she wanted to eat. After all, the return to Void Realm did not need to eat anything, and she had no interest in most foods. If it wasn't what Senior Sister wanted, it couldn't be what the sect master wanted, Musian said. It stands to reason that the sect master should not be a greedy person. Lan Murian glanced at him and said, "Not master. Who else could it be? Linglong? Well, it's not impossible. After all, Linglong has been in the sect for so long, it is impossible for him not to know the sect master. After all, it seems that the sect master's shadow is behind his meeting with Linglong." He grabbed Yayu, the fat sheep, and tried to fleece him, while the Empress also grabbed him and tried to fleece him. Oh, no, concubine Shangyan was not fleecing, she was sending him wool. Gazing at Musian, who seemed to be thinking about something, Lan Murian hesitated for a moment, and then, with a hint of strangeness on her cold face that seemed to be carefully carved by God, she said, "Thank you for today's gift." "This is really strange, Senior Sister actually said thank you." Musian looked at the cold Senior Sister strangely, as if she was looking at a rare animal, and said with a smile, "Senior Sister helped me a lot in the past, and I also want to do something for you." As if unwilling to dwell on this topic, Lan Murian changed the subject and said, "The Saint of Yaoqi should have come to see you today." Musian nodded and said, "Fairy Yao, you asked me some questions, by the way, I don't seem to have seen her tonight." "She left Lianji sect and returned to Yaoqi this evening," Lan Murian said. "She returned to Yaoqi so early, it seems that the matter of the Green Emperor is indeed very important to her and even to Yaoqi." Musian understood in his heart. "What did she ask you for?" Lan Murian asked knowingly. Under the veil, a pair of bright eyes stared at Musian quietly. Musian did not intend to hide this matter, and replied, "Senior Sister should know what happened in the pilgrimage hall before." Of course, she nodded gently. "In fact, there is a cave created by Senior Kingdi. Now she is seriously injured, so she is temporarily staying in my body," Musian said. "Senior Kingdi is in your body?" Lan Murian heard an unexpected news and stared at Musian. Musian nodded and said, "My natural furnace seems to be able to warm the spiritual consciousness, so Senior Kingdi chose to rest in my other furnace for a while." Lan Murian's eyes flashed slightly, and she said to herself, Senior Kingdi would not be seriously injured for no reason, and there was obviously some seal in the pilgrimage hall at that time. Is it because of that seal that she became like this now? Thoughts flashed in her mind, as if she was thinking about something. After a moment, Lan Murian seemed to have figured out something and couldn't help but chuckle, but soon maintained her usual aloof attitude and said, "Yaoqi Holy Land is an ancient family. If Yaoqi Saint asks you for help, she will give you corresponding rewards. Don't be polite to her." Looking at the way Yaoqi Saint and Senior Sister get along today, the two obviously have a good relationship, but Senior Sister still prefers my side. Musian was quite pleased and nodded seriously. After the two chatted for a few more sentences, Lan Murian suddenly said, 3 days later, there will be a small competition between disciples at Qingyang Hall on the south bank. If you are interested, you can go and see it then." "Small competition?" Musian asked in confusion. "If I remember correctly, the South Bank seems to be the territory of the Law Enforcement Hall. Why is there a competition for no reason?" "This time, the genius disciples from the outside world have entered the sect one after another. It is a small exchange to test the strength of the other party," Lan Murian said. "Will Senior Sister also participate?" Musian asked. Lan Murian shook her head slightly. "The two venues are attended by disciples who are practicing qi and refining spirits." No wonder, Musian suddenly realized. Lan Murian, who is in the Return to Void Realm, is already at the level of an elder in Lianji section. How can others play when the referee enters the venue? "I am only a few years younger than my senior sister," but my senior sister has already reached the return to void realm, while I have just reached the refining spirit realm. The gap is really big. Musian sighed lightly, feeling a little emotional. Lan Murian said carefully, it is rare for someone of your age to reach the refining spirit realm. There is no need to belittle yourself. I know. Musian nodded. It is estimated that his talent has surpassed more than 99% of his peers, but several people he knows around him are peerless geniuses who have achieved a small success, so in comparison, it seems that his talent is very weak. And, he doesn't really care whether his talent is weak or not. After all, his position is not a genius at all, but a supporting genius. And he got encouragement from his senior sister tonight, which is not a pity. Musian stared at Lan Murian's beautiful face covered with a veil, and suddenly said, by the way, what is the constitution of my senior sister? Lan Murian did not say anything. Musian continued, sacred body of destiny. The cold beauty's eyes moved slightly, and she raised her eyelids and stared at Musian. When did you find out? As long as you observe my senior sister more often, you will naturally find out. Musian smiled. Lan Murian glanced at him and responded coldly, I think the one you observe the most is Miss Bai. Musian shook his head and said, I am devoted to my senior sister. Lan Murian raised a mocking arc at the corner of her mouth, obviously not believing it. Then he thought, but if he didn't observe carefully, how did he know my constitution? Master told him. It is impossible, Master would never tell Musian about such a thing. Musian stared at Lan Murian, who was wearing a gorgeous long dress and looked like a fairy from the Yaotai, and suddenly said, by the way, senior sister, there are only two of us here, why don't you take off your veil? Lan Murian responded coldly, what are you doing? I want to see. Musian stared at senior sister's bright eyes. Not interested. Lan Murian refused. There was a slight silence in the pavilion for a moment, and Musian suddenly pointed behind Lan Murian and said, senior sister, look at what that is. When Lan Murian was about to turn around, Musian took the opportunity to reach out and take off the thin veil on Lan Murian's face, staring at the beautiful face, and smiled, it's really beautiful. Realizing that she was being teased, Lan Murian's eyes were full of anger, staring at the smile on Musian's face, and said, get lost. Okay, Musian was satisfied and turned away. Lan Murian stared silently at the direction where Musian left, and was silent in the pavilion. After a while, the beauty in the white dress stood up and walked out of the pavilion. She slowly raised her head in the moonlight, closed her eyes slightly, and felt the cool air. After a long time, she opened her eyes again. Musian. She murmured softly for no reason. On that cold face, there seemed to be a faint blush under the moonlight. Canghai Peak, Back Mountain. Leaning against the throne, Yingguhuan, who was dignified, raised her eyes slightly and stared at the man standing in front of the palace. Didn't I say that if you have nothing to do, don't come to Canghai Peak to find me, Yingguhuan said in a soft and gentle voice. News from the queen. The man spoke respectfully, and then presented a piece of letter paper. Hearing the word queen, Yingguhuan's face became more serious, and she took the letter paper and opened it. Then, after reading it carefully, the face of the first-generation leader could not help but have a strange look. Does the queen have any instructions? The man asked tentatively. This is not a letter to me, Yingguhuan said. If it is not written to you, then who else could it be? Yingguhuan did not answer, but glanced at him lazily and said, you can leave first. After a while, after her subordinates left, she showed a thoughtful look on her face, called a disciple, and said, go and call Musian. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 180. Senior sister's strategy is too difficult, but it looks like it should be somewhat effective tonight. Could it be that she actually prefers being passive and being teased rather than taking the initiative? I'll give it a try next time I have a chance. Muzian recalled the scene Lan Mulian showed when he unveiled his veil tonight, and couldn't help but feel a lot happier. He flew towards Tianhe Garden with his sword, but as soon as he arrived at the gate of Liulai Palace, he saw a disciple standing in the darkness. When the disciple saw Muzian, he said as if he was relieved, "Brother Pastor, you are finally back." "This senior brother is?" Muzian asked doubtfully. "Master invites you to go to the back mountain of Kanghai Peak," the male disciple said. "Master?" He should be talking about Yingguhuan. Muzian was slightly understanding, and soon, there was a trace of doubt in his heart. Why is Yingguhuan giving me news at this time? He wanted to go back to his thoughts, but he still nodded slightly and left Liulai Palace with the male disciple. Not long after, he came to the back mountain, walked into the cave, and saw this charming woman in a red dress in the main hall. The male disciple beside him seemed to be quite wary of Yingguhuan, and he bowed and said, "Master, I have brought the priest brother here." After saying that, when Yingguhuan raised her eyes and signaled, the male disciple knew what she meant and immediately left the hall. "Sister Ying, what's the matter with calling me so late?" Because there was no one else in the hall, Muzian was not as cautious as before. Yingguhuan narrowed his eyes and stared at the young man in the audience, sitting with his slender jade legs crossed, and said with a smile, "You are really a busy man. If I hadn't sent someone to find you, I would have. Don't you plan to come to see me?" Muzian smiled helplessly. What did Sister Ying say? Previously, Senior Sister Lan was promoted to the Return to the Void Realm, and the disciples needed to prepare gifts. "I originally wanted to come back to you today, but in the end I was interrupted by monks from the outside world, and a lot of time was wasted." Yingguhuan was confused. A monk from the outside world? The genius in the restricted area? Zhou Hao. Muzian sighed softly. The disciple is a young master from a small family. How can he compare to others? "I spent a lot of effort today and finally managed to get the other party to restrain himself from bullying the disciple." Idea. A genius in the forbidden area? Yingguhuan snorted coldly. The master of the forbidden area never interferes with the hatred entanglements between the younger generation of the clan and others. If the other party bullies you, there is no need to be polite to him. Isn't this not good? Isn't there a rule that says you can't do anything within the sect? Muzian hesitated. The sect does not allow private fights, but it does allow for discussion. After fighting, just throw a letter of invitation to the other party. If anything happens, I will take care of it for you. Muzian looked touched. Sister Ying is so kind. Although the other party is a demon cultivator, Muzian has not felt anything bad about the demon cultivator so far. The reason why Yingguhuan is so good to Muzian is not only because of his natural furnace, but also the way he talks and his actions are great bonus points. By the way, does Sister Ying have something to do tonight? Muzian suddenly asked. Yingguhuan nodded slightly, raised his fingers, and signaled Muzian to come to the throne. Seeing the gentle young man who was as gentle as a noble prince approaching, she took out a folded letter from her arms and handed it to Muzian. Muzian glanced at the unfathomable human heart calmly, then took the letter from Yingguhuan and opened it and took a look. From the initial casualness to the gradual seriousness, after an unknown amount of time, Muzian put down the letter in his hand and looked at Yingguhuan. "Sister Ying, have you known this for a long time?" The content of the letter was written by the Queen of the Demon Realm, and the content was related to the seal in the pilgrimage hall. "How can I say that I have been in the sect for so long? Naturally, I have also explored the cave in the pilgrimage hall in the past." Yingguhuan smiled calmly. "But I've never been into it," she continued. "There have been several earthquakes in the pilgrimage hall in the past." Yingguhuan had planned to enter the cave of the pilgrimage hall to find out what was going on. However, as soon as he stepped into it, he sensed an extremely dangerous aura, so he did not go deep. This letter written by the Queen of the Demon Realm is basically about the first-generation Demon Emperor. The other party wrote about the life of the first-generation demon emperor, and at the end he wrote 4 big words: wait and see what happens. What is the relationship between the queen of the demon realm and the first demon emperor? Does Sister Ying know anything about it? Muzian asked. The demon world is currently divided into 2 factions. Ying Guhuan said, one faction is the remnants of the demon cultivators headed by the first-generation demon emperor, and the other faction is the current queen of the demon realm. Ying Guhuan said, however, in the past 1,000 years, the remnants of the first-generation demon emperor have been basically wiped out, and there is no way to cause any trouble. In that case, why did the queen ask me to wait and see what happens? Muzian asked with some doubts. If we can take the opportunity to get rid of the first-generation demon emperor, this should be what the demon realm queen wants to see the most. Ying Guhuan narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, it's for your own good to let you wait and see what happens. The first-generation demon emperor couldn't stretch out his hand in the Lianji sect, but there will still be shadows where the light can't find it. Sister Ying means that there may be subordinates of the first demon emperor in the sect. Muzian understood Ying Guhuan's words. If this is the case, then you really need to be careful. Previously, Muzian thought that the first-generation demon emperor, who was sealed by the Qing emperor, had no choice but to believe in him. But if someone in the sect is secretly contacting the first demon emperor, what will the other party do to rescue the first demon emperor? You must be careful. Muzian nodded seriously, thank you sister for your enlightenment. Ying Guhuan smiled and said, when expressing gratitude, just a thank you seems a little too light. When she said the last word, she stared at Muzian with a pair of charming eyes and smiled, remember to express gratitude in a more practical way next time. Muzian understood and nodded, disciple knows. Ying Guhuan did not make things difficult for Muzian, but waved his hand to let him leave. Although she had a lot of ideas about the natural furnace cauldron, the Green Emperor was still in Muzian's body. Once they practiced dual cultivation, it would be no fun if the Green Emperor noticed it. After all, the reason why the Green Emperor stayed in Muzian's body might be largely because of the natural furnace cauldron. After the Green Emperor reshapes his body, it will be the best time to start. Ying Guhuan still has this patience. She has been stuck in the 7th level of Return to Void for several years, so it won't matter if she can endure another month or 2. Tianhe Garden. Bairuoxi wore a plain white dress with a white base and embellished with lavender snow lotus. Her full chest proudly supported the front of her clothes, showing a scale that was enough to amaze everyone who saw this scene. She slowly opened her eyes, and not far in front of her, a milky white sphere shining with a gentle halo slowly rotated, transforming the mixed spiritual energy around into purer spiritual energy for her meditation and practice. It must be said that the spiritual energy of Lianji sect is much richer than that of the mountain, and it is also much purer, so the speed of purification is also faster, which is naturally of great help to Bairuoxi's practice. She raised her white hand lightly, and the energy of heaven fell into her palm, and then quietly disappeared into the house. Bairuoxi stood up, her bare feet wrapped in a pair of white short socks, and a delicate and beautiful black ribbon hung on her ankles, which made her already snow-white skin look translucent. She walked out of the room in her embroidered shoes, lazily stretching her waist, revealing her slender and seductive figure. Not long after walking out of the house, there was a pond, in which the hazy moonlight was reflected, and several snow lotuses swayed with the night breeze, swaying their bodies. Bairuoxi raised her head, and under a pavilion not far from the pond, a maid in a yellow skirt was looking up at the moonlight, as if in a daze. Wei Mengru noticed the gaze behind her, and slightly turned her head to look over, just in time to see Bairuoxi clasped her hands together in front of her palace skirt, walking towards her. Sister Mengru, aren't you resting so late? Bairuoxi asked with a smile. You don't need to rest after refining the spirit realm, Wei Mengru said lightly. Bairuoxi nodded slightly, not dwelling on this topic, and asked casually, by the way, where is Mr. Mu? It seems that he was called to Kanghai Peak by the disciples sent by the chief seat. Just now when Wei Mengru said this, she inadvertently glanced at the stunning beauty beside her. Although Bai Ruoxi seemed to be gentle and pitiful at ordinary times, she knew that the first beauty of Tianqian City was actually a very strong person. Before, in front of Ye Lingxian and even Lan Murian, Bai Ruoxi called Musian Mu Lang. As for why he was called Mr. Mu here, it was probably because in Bai Ruoxi's eyes, she was not an enemy, or Bai Ruoxi did not take her seriously. But Wei Mengru didn't care what the reason was. Why do these chief seats take care of him so much? Bai Ruoxi frowned slightly when she heard this, and spoke softly. In the past few months, the chiefs of the 9 main peaks have more or less sent some elixirs, and the ones that have sent the most are probably Kanghai Peak, Tianji Peak, and Dao Peak. Let's not talk about the library for now. After all, Yan Ruyu only has an inner disciple like Musian, so it is normal for her to do her best to give him elixirs. But it is really strange that the other chiefs are so enthusiastic. Maybe it's because of the spirit dragon, Wei Mengru said. Maybe it's about the natural furnace, Bai Ruoxi said faintly. Wei Mengru looked up at this weak beauty who seemed to have no bad intentions in surprise. It seemed that she didn't expect Bai Ruoxi to know so many things while meditating in Tianhe Garden every day. What are you going to do? Wei Mengru asked. The several chiefs are all well known in the section. If it is for the Tiansheng furnace cauldron, they will not openly propose the idea of wanting to get the Tiansheng furnace cauldron. Bai Ruoxi paused for a moment and continued, and isn't Senior Kingdi also nurturing his spiritual consciousness in the Tiansheng furnace cauldron? In the short term, the chiefs will not do anything. What if Kingdi reshapes his body in the future and leaves his Tiansheng furnace cauldron? Wei Mengru asked. She was indifferent by nature, but she was inexplicably interested. Even the maids can't resist the charm of eating melons. It's unreasonable for the chief to attack the disciples. Bai Ruoxi's eyes suddenly became sharp, and in the darkness, her temperament suddenly became much more stern. However, in less than a second, she turned into the weak and fragile eldest lady of the Bai family, and said worriedly, the several chiefs are all in the return to void realm. If their purpose is really the Tiansheng furnace cauldron, what should I do alone? Miss Bai was a little worried because she was alone and weak, and she was just a weak woman at the peak of the 4th level of soul refining. Wei Mengru took a sip of tea calmly and said nothing. Maybe, I should go to talk to Sister Lingxian, Bai Ruoxi said to herself again. Although Ye Lingxian had some bad intentions towards Musian, the girl was relatively simple. The idea of this beautiful lady at this moment was that it would be better to reach a consensus with the 2 sisters first rather than let outsiders intervene. At least they were all small fish and not a big threat. But if a great white shark was accidentally introduced, it would be different. Knock knock. Bai Ruoxi lowered her eyes and looked at the teacup on the table. Her green jade fingers gently tapped the table, and her cold face was filled with serious thinking. Wei Mengru's mouth curled up slightly, and she felt inexplicably happy. Meditation and cultivation on weekdays were too boring. At this moment, being able to eat melons on the side naturally made her inexplicably happy. At this moment, she suddenly seemed to notice something, turned her head and looked in a certain direction. Her eyes moved slightly. Someone else has returned to the void after refining the spirit? Refining the spirit and returning to the void is a strong person who has truly entered the realm of immortals. No matter where in Jizhu, returning to the void is a strong person. There are too few people who can return to the void after refining the spirit. And Lan Murian has just been refining the spirit and returning to the void for a short time, and there is another person who has entered the realm of immortals on land. And this direction is Tianqian City. Sister Mengru, what are you looking at? When Wei Mengru was thinking, a young man's voice suddenly came from the side. Bai Ruoxi and Wei Mengru looked up at the same time and saw Musian, who had just returned to Tianhe Garden. Someone in Tianqian City has entered the return to the void, Wei Mengru said. Return to the void? Muzian repeated in a low voice, with a bit more solemnity in his eyes. Now the geniuses in Tianqian City are all practicing in Lianji section. Even if there are geniuses in the city, they are only in the Qi training stage. In other words, the person who is promoted to the return to void stage this time must be an old monster or a clan leader of a family in Tianqian City. If it is the Mu family, it is fine. If it is another family, it may directly change the situation of the entire Tianqian City. It seems that I have to find time to go back and take a look in the next few days. Muzian looked thoughtful. Mu Lang came back so late tonight. Did any of the chiefs look for you? Bairuoxi raised his head and stared at Muzian with gentle concern in his eyes. Muzian looked at Bairuoxi's beautiful face and nodded. Yi Hao's master, the first generation of the head of Kanghai Peak. Headmaster Ying. Bairuoxi, who often went to Kanghai Peak during this period, naturally knew this name, and said to himself in surprise, "Why did she ask you to do it?" "If I have to say, it has something to do with you," Muzian said, and his eyes swept over the protruding figure under Bairuoxi's white skirt. "Is it related to me?" Bairuoxi tilted her head slightly and looked up at Muzian. But Muzian did not answer, but put one hand on Bairuoxi's delicate jade hand and said softly, "I'll tell you slowly in the evening. It's so late, go back and rest early to avoid catching a cold." Besides, the weather was so cold, he also needed Bairuoxi to warm his hands. Seemingly aware of what Muzian was looking at, Bairuoxi immediately rolled his eyes at him. But Muzian didn't mind at all. He glanced at Wei Mengru, who got up and left the pavilion, grabbed Bairuoxi's hand, and said, "Let's go. We'll go back to the room to rest, Ruoxi." Aware of Muzian's sincere and gentle eyes, Bairuoxi naturally knew what he was thinking. She shyly lowered her eyes and didn't look at him, but just let Muzian pull her hand and walk into the house. After a while, Muzian lit the candle on the table and looked at Bairuoxi sitting on the bed with one leg and her snow-white calves under the hem of her skirt. Bairuoxi was about to take off the white socks on her feet, but Muzian immediately stepped forward and put one hand on the back of her hand to stop her. "Keep the socks." Muzian stared at the beauty in the plain white dress. A strand of hair on her forehead was placed on her cold face with a little blush, which had a three-dimensional beauty of a mixed-race beauty. Bairuoxi looked up at Muzian in confusion, blinked, and said, "Why?" Muzian said, "They increase the attack speed." Bairuoxi tilted her head slightly, not understanding. Muzian smiled, "It's okay, it doesn't matter if you don't understand, you will understand later." After that, he drew the curtain, then let Bairuoxi lean back on the bed, lowered his head and slowly tasted the rouge on her lips. 3 days later. Qingyang Hall is located on the south bank of Lianji sect, one of the halls in the law enforcement hall area. In front of the hall are 2 lifelike dragons carved. Their shapes are majestic and beautiful, and every scale on their bodies is perfectly presented, vivid and lifelike. Obviously, this carved dragon is Miss Linglong, who currently lives in Muzian's Tianhe garden and eats and drinks for free every day. In the hall is a huge square, with several passages leading to different areas. Today, many talented disciples of the younger generation will be here to discuss or exchange ideas. Muzian naturally plans to come over to take a look, and by the way, confirm what kind of genius he will meet at the Ascension Conference in 2 months. When Muzian and Bairuoxi came to the square in Qingyang Hall, they saw many disciples from the section. Most of them were in groups, and some were male disciples gathered together, upholding the arrogant attitude of cultivators. In fact, most disciples felt sour in their hearts when they saw the couples being affectionate, and they almost bit their handkerchiefs with jealousy. When Muzian and Bairuoxi walked into Qingyang Hall together, they immediately attracted the attention of many disciples. A few days ago, Muzian had just given Lan Murian a big gift, so many disciples knew the name Muzian. And Bairuoxi's reputation and even beauty in Kanghai Peak have also spread to several major peaks during this period of time. "It's junior sister Bai," suddenly someone whispered. Many people's eyes fell on the two of them, and then they started chatting in a low voice. Tisk, it's really as rumored, she's a great beauty. If I can have such a beauty by my side, I'll have no regrets in my life. Heh, a Taoist partner will only affect our cultivation speed. There were also disciples in the crowd who said disdainfully. However, as soon as the voice fell, someone immediately sneered and said, why is he still a top-notch genius in the sect even though he has a Taoist partner? This sentence directly silenced many disciples of the sect who said women will only affect my cultivation speed. This sentence was really murderous. Bairuoxi and Musian fell in love, but their cultivation speed did not fall behind at all. Instead, they showed an extremely evil cultivation speed, which was loved by the head of Kanghai Peak and even the brothers and sisters. What about those who don't have Taoist partners? Such a cold beauty, I don't know how the pastor brother chased her. After a short silence, a senior brother suddenly sighed. Because these whispers were not transmitted by voice, Musian naturally heard them and couldn't help but turn his head to look at Bairuoxi beside him. Her delicate and cold face, plain white skirt, plump chest, slender waist, and elastic white legs outlined a charming and convex curve. Everyone is praising you for being a cold and beautiful woman, Musian whispered. Bairuoxi said lightly, maintaining her usual aloofness when she was outside. Musian looked at this scene, thought for a while, and transmitted his voice, but when I was resting last night, I didn't seem to be very cold. Probably no one can imagine the charm of this cold beauty when she takes the initiative. Musian couldn't imagine what Bairuoxi's charm would be like, he just saw it with his own eyes. Bairuoxi's pretty face turned red, obviously remembering something, and couldn't help but glance at Musian in a reproachful way, not wanting to pay attention to him, and quickened his pace and walked into a certain area not far ahead. That's right, it's boring to be cold all the time, Musian smiled and followed leisurely. This scene was enough to make people feel jealous, and many male disciples were jealous, and they wanted to kick Musian away and replace him. If I remember correctly, this pastor brother seems to have a good relationship with the sisters Ye Lingxian from Daofeng. Suddenly a disciple spoke up. Tisk, I often saw him go to Tianji Peak to find junior sister Feiying some time ago. For a while, all the disciples were a little restless. It would be fine if he just hooked up with the beautiful Bairuoxi, but he even didn't let go of the little beauty, and even went to Tianxian City to buy cakes for senior sister Lan a few days ago. This boy must not be kept. At this moment, many disciples had this idea in their hearts, and they wanted to challenge Musian directly. But there are also some female cultivators who are quite friendly to Musian. Whether it is the romantic act of traveling thousands of miles to buy cakes or the generosity of giving away the seeds of enlightenment, they are all enough to move people. In the crowd, Gongsun Cheng, who had just arrived in front of Qingyang Hall, also stared at the scene with a bit of gloom in his eyes. A senior brother from Kangjian Peak next to Gongsun Cheng sighed, this Musian is almost at the end when he was born. He is on good terms with his senior sister and has such a close relationship with the genius disciples of Kanghai Peak. His future achievements will definitely not be too low. And if I remember correctly, the Mu family is also the most powerful in Tianxian City, right, junior brother? The senior brother from Kangjian Peak looked at Gongsun Cheng and said. Yes, the Mu family is the largest now. Gongsun Cheng stared at the direction where Musian walked into the depths of the hall, but added another sentence in his heart. But it may not be the case in the future.